From the moment our earliest ancestors gazed upward into the night sky, humanity has been captivated by the vast expanse above us. Those twinkling points of light have stirred something deep within our collective soul, a sense of wonder, a hunger for understanding, and an unshakable curiosity about what lies beyond our world. For thousands of years, we told stories about the constellations, built monuments aligned with the stars, and dreamed of reaching those distant celestial bodies. But it wasn't until relatively recently that we truly began to turn those dreams into reality, embarking on one of the most extraordinary journeys in human history. That journey into space has fundamentally transformed not just our understanding of the universe, but the very course of our civilization in ways both obvious and subtle. What's truly remarkable is how specific moments in our exploration of space have served as turning points that altered human history forever. These aren't just interesting footnotes in science textbooks, they're pivotal events that reshaped global politics, accelerated technological advancement, changed how we see our place in the cosmos, and even influenced our daily lives in ways we rarely stop to appreciate. From the first satellite that beeped its way across the heavens to the breathtaking images of distant galaxies, each breakthrough has sent ripples through time, affecting everything from international relations to the devices in our pockets. These space events have rewritten the rules of what's possible, pushing the boundaries of human achievement while simultaneously bringing our world closer together. Today, we're going to explore 30 of these extraordinary moments that changed history forever. We'll journey through the decades, from the tense beginnings of the space race to the collaborative efforts of the International Space Station, from robotic explorers venturing to distant worlds to telescopes peering back in time toward the dawn of the universe. Each event represents not just a technological triumph, but a profound shift in human consciousness, a moment when we collectively took another step toward understanding our place in the grand cosmic scheme. So join me as we uncover these pivotal space events, each one a thread in the magnificent tapestry of human exploration that continues to unfold above us every single day. Our journey begins not with a giant leap, but with a simple, steady beep, a sound that would echo across the globe and change the course of human history. On October 4, 1957, the Soviet Union silently launched a polished metal sphere no bigger than a beach ball into the heavens. They called it Sputnik, which simply translates to satellite or traveling companion. This unassuming object, equipped with nothing more than 2 radio transmitters and 4 long antennas, became the first artificial satellite to successfully orbit our planet. Every 96 minutes it circled the Earth, and with each pass, its unmistakable beep, beep, beep signal was picked up by ham radios and government listening posts worldwide. The technological achievement itself was staggering for its time. Placing an object into orbit required overcoming immense challenges in rocket propulsion, guidance systems, and materials science. The Soviets used a modified intercontinental ballistic missile, the R-7, to accomplish this feat, a fact that was not lost on military strategists. But the true impact of Sputnik 1 was not just technological, it was profoundly psychological and political. For the United States and its Western allies, that steady, innocuous beeping was not a friendly hello from space, it was a terrifying alarm bell. It was a stark, undeniable demonstration that a rival superpower now possessed the capability to launch objects into space, which directly implied they could also launch nuclear warheads across continents. Overnight, the security provided by vast oceans seemed to vanish. This single event ignited the space race with the intensity of a rocket booster. A palpable sense of panic and urgency swept through the American public and its government. How had they fallen so dangerously behind? Newspapers ran frantic headlines, politicians gave grave speeches, and classrooms began urgently re-evaluating their science and math curricula. In direct response, the United States government established the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, in 1958, consolidating various research efforts under one agency dedicated to space exploration. Furthermore, the Defense Advanced Research Projects Agency, DARPA, was created to ensure the U.S. would never again be surprised by a technological leap from a competitor. The ripple effects were immediate and massive. Unprecedented federal investment flooded into universities and research laboratories. Science and engineering, once niche fields, were suddenly positioned as pillars of national security and patriotic duty. An entire generation of students was encouraged to become scientists and engineers, fundamentally reshaping the American educational system and workforce for decades to come. That small, beeping sphere did more than just orbit the Earth. It single-handedly catapulted humanity out of a purely terrestrial existence and into a new cosmic arena of competition, discovery, and ambition. It was the spark that lit the fuse for everything that was to follow. Just as Sputnik's beep had announced humanity's arrival in space, a new sound echoed from the cosmos a few short years later, the calm, steady voice of a human being. On April 12, 1961, Soviet cosmonaut Yuri Gagarin peered through the window of his Vostok 1 spacecraft and witnessed what no person had ever seen before, our home planet in its entirety hanging in the profound blackness of space. His historic flight, a single orbit that lasted 1 hour and 48 minutes, was far more than a political counterpunch in the space race. It was a fundamental rewriting of what it meant to be human. For the first time, a representative of our species had slipped the bonds of Earth's gravity and looked back upon the world from the silent expanse. The mission itself was a masterpiece of engineering and immense courage, cloaked in secrecy until its stunning success. Gagarin was launched from the Baikonur Cosmodrome atop a modified R-7 rocket, the same type that had carried Sputnik. Sealed inside his spherical descent module, he was essentially a passenger on a fully automated journey. Engineers, fearful of how weightlessness might affect a human mind, had even locked the manual controls, providing Gagarin with an override code only in case of a dire emergency. His now legendary report during launch, Poikali, which translates to "Let's go," masked the very real and unknown dangers he faced, from the possibility of his craft breaking apart on ascent to the uncharted psychological effects of space. His safe return, ejecting from the capsule and parachuting to the ground separately, was the final, triumphant hurdle in a mission that many thought impossible. The global reaction to Gagarin's flight was a powerful mix of awe, celebration, and deep-seated fear. Around the world, front-page headlines celebrated the incredible human achievement. For millions, Gagarin instantly became a global hero and a symbol of a new, limitless future. His smiling face and humble demeanor made space exploration feel personal and profoundly human. Yet, in the halls of power in Washington, D.C., the news landed with the force of a bombshell. If the Soviets could put a man in orbit, what else could they do? The military implications were terrifyingly clear. The same rockets that launched cosmonauts could also deliver nuclear weapons, and the United States once again found itself playing a very public game of catch-up. This single event poured rocket fuel on the American space program, creating a national urgency that would directly lead President John F. Kennedy to stand before Congress just weeks later and commit the nation to landing a man on the moon before the decade was out. Perhaps the most enduring impact of Gagarin's journey, however, was on our own psychology and philosophy. His descriptions of Earth from space, a beautiful, fragile-looking planet without visible borders, introduced a new concept into human consciousness, the overview effect. Although he didn't coin the term, his experience was its first-hand account. He spoke of the stunning blues of the oceans, the intricate patterns of clouds, and the profound realization that we all share this single, magnificent world. This perspective began a subtle but powerful shift in how we view ourselves. seeding the ideas of global citizenship and environmental awareness. Yuri Gagarin didn't just prove that spaceflight was possible, he demonstrated that humanity itself could survive and thrive in the cosmos, forever shattering the mental barrier that had kept us planet-bound and fundamentally expanding our vision of the future. He was the first to show us that our destiny was and is written in the stars. If Sputnik delivered a shock and Gagarin a stunning blow, the American space program desperately needed a win. That victory would not come from a single orbit, but from a sustained presence in the void. Enter John Glenn, a Marine Corps test pilot whose courage and composure would transform a nation's anxiety into a wellspring of fierce pride. On February 20th, 1962, after 10 grueling delays that frayed the nerves of an entire country, Glenn strapped into the cramped confines of his Mercury capsule, Friendship 7. His mission was deceptively simple: to prove that an American could not only survive in orbit but perform essential functions, completing 3 full loops around the Earth. The world watched, holding its breath, as the Atlas rocket thundered to life, carrying the hopes of a nation skyward. The technical hurdles were immense and unforgiving. The Mercury spacecraft was a tiny, conical capsule, just large enough for one person, and every system was pushing the very limits of known technology. Unlike the automated Vostok, Friendship 7 required the astronaut to be an active pilot, manually adjusting the craft's orientation and managing its systems. But the most terrifying challenge revealed itself halfway through Glenn's first orbit. A signal from a sensor indicated that the capsule's critical heat shield, the ablative barrier designed to protect him from the inferno of re-entry, might be loose. If this was true, Glenn would be incinerated in a matter of minutes upon hitting the atmosphere. Mission Control, in a frantic, silent panic, made a crucial and risky decision. They ordered Glenn to keep his retro rocket pack, a set of small braking rockets normally jettisoned after use, strapped to the base of the craft during re-entry, hoping its straps would help hold the shield in place. Glenn, cool and professional, acknowledged the instruction, fully aware that he was essentially riding a potential bomb back to Earth. As Friendship 7 slammed back into the atmosphere, plasma engulfed the capsule, and chunks of the burning retropack broke off and streaked past his window like meteors. Through his microphone, Glenn famously described the scene as a real fireball outside. For 4 agonizing minutes, ground controllers lost all communication, unsure if they would hear his voice again or only silence. When his steady, calm tone finally crackled through the static, confirming he had survived the burn, an entire country exhaled. His successful splashdown in the Atlantic Ocean wasn't just the end of a mission, it was a national catharsis. The United States had not just matched the Soviet feat, it had stared down a catastrophic failure, and, through the skill of its engineers and the valor of its astronaut, triumphed. John Glenn instantly became more than an astronaut. He was a national hero on par with Charles Lindbergh. His flight restored America's confidence in its technological prowess and its competitive spirit. Parades attended by millions celebrated his achievement, and his face graced the covers of every major magazine. Politicians cited his mission as proof of American resilience and ingenuity. Most importantly, he demonstrated that the U.S. was a serious and capable player in the space race, setting the stage for the more complex Gemini missions that would follow and proving that humans could work effectively in space for extended periods. Glenn's orbital flight was the turning point that convinced a doubtful public that the moon was not an impossible dream, but a destination within reach. Yet even as these heroes captured the public's imagination, a far more terrifying drama was unfolding behind the scenes, one where the stakes were not national pride but global survival. The year 1962 brought the world to the very edge of nuclear annihilation during the 13 agonizing days of the Cuban Missile Crisis. While the confrontation played out in the halls of the Kremlin and the White House, and on the decks of naval ships, a new and critical player had entered the arena of international security: space-based reconnaissance. The fear of what these new eyes in the sky could see, or more importantly, what they might miss, became a central and paralyzing factor in the standoff. The crisis was sparked when American U-2 spy planes, flying at the very edge of space, captured photographs of Soviet nuclear missile sites under construction in Cuba, just 90 miles from the coast of Florida. This intelligence was undeniable proof of a direct and immediate threat, but the technology, while revolutionary, was also imperfect and fraught with peril. Each flight risked being shot down, potentially sparking the very war it was trying to prevent. Furthermore, the images provided a snapshot in time, not a live feed. Leaders in Washington and Moscow were operating on hours-old information, all while their nuclear arsenals were on hair-trigger alert. The most dangerous moment occurred when a U-2 flight over Siberia accidentally strayed into Soviet airspace, prompting Soviet MiGs to scramble. Meanwhile, another U-2 was shot down over Cuba. In both instances, the fog of war thickened, and the potential for a catastrophic miscalculation soared. Each side was essentially blindfolded, armed, and feeling for the other in a dark room, unsure if the next move would be perceived as an attack. This terrifyingly slow and flawed communication loop nearly proved fatal. A critical message from Soviet Premier Nikita Khrushchev to President John F. Kennedy took over 12 hours to be transmitted, translated, and delivered. During that agonizing delay, the situation on the ground grew more volatile. Both leaders realized that in the nuclear age, where minutes could mean the difference between peace and oblivion, the existing diplomatic channels, telegrams routed through embassies and clumsy third-party mediators, were utterly insufficient. The world had narrowly avoided destruction, not because of its communication systems, but in spite of them. The profound shock of this near disaster created an urgent and rare moment of clarity between the two superpowers. Just months after the crisis was resolved, in June of 1963, the United States and the Soviet Union signed the Memorandum of Understanding between the United States of America and the Union of Soviet Socialist Republics regarding the establishment of a direct communications link. The world would come to know it simply as the hotline. Contrary to popular myth, it was not a red telephone, but a dedicated system of teletype machines and, later, fax lines connecting the Kremlin directly to the Pentagon. Its purpose was starkly simple: to provide a secure, immediate, and reliable channel for leaders to communicate during a crisis, to clarify intentions, and to dispel the kind of dangerous misunderstandings that had nearly ended the world. The establishment of the hotline represented a fundamental shift in Cold War diplomacy. It was the first major arms control agreement, but it wasn't about limiting weapons. It was about managing the immense danger those weapons created. It was a tangible admission from both sides that their mutual survival depended on clear communication. This direct link, born from the terror of the Cuban Missile Crisis and enabled by the new reality of space-age reconnaissance, became one of the most enduring symbols of Cold War stability. It showed that even in the midst of intense ideological conflict, pragmatism and the shared instinct for self-preservation could prevail. The eyes in the sky had revealed a threat, but they had also helped show both superpowers the one thing they truly had in common: a planet they were not ready to lose. While the superpowers were locked in a tense standoff high above the Earth, another space-based technology was being developed, one with a far more peaceful and universally beneficial purpose. This innovation wouldn't spy on military installations or deliver nuclear warheads. Instead, it would look down upon our entire planet and see the beautiful, complex, and often dangerous patterns of its weather. Before April 1, 1960, humanity was essentially blind to the full picture of our own atmosphere. Forecasts were based on scattered ground observations and ship reports, leaving vast stretches of the ocean and remote regions as complete mysteries where storms could brew and intensify without warning. That all changed with the launch of the television infrared observation satellite, known to the world as TIROS-1. This pioneering satellite was a technological marvel for its time, though it appears almost comically simple by today's standards. Shaped like a large hatbox, it stood just 19 inches high and was 42 inches in diameter. It carried two small Vidicon television cameras, each no more powerful than those found in a modern-day doorbell, and a magnetic tape recorder to store images when it was out of range of a ground station. Its mission was audacious: to capture the first ever television images of Earth's weather patterns from space. The initial photograph it beamed back was a fuzzy, low-resolution picture of thick cloud cover over the northeastern United States. To the scientists and engineers at NASA and the Radio Corporation of America who built it, that grainy image was as breathtaking as any high-definition panorama of Mars. For the very first time, we could see a storm system not as a local event of rain and wind, but as a massive, organized structure moving across the globe. The impact of this new perspective was immediate and profound. Meteorologists could now track the development and movement of hurricanes, typhoons, and cyclones from their earliest formation over the open ocean, long before they posed a threat to populated coastlines. This wasn't just an improvement in forecasting, it was a revolution in public safety. Evacuations could be ordered with greater confidence and far more lead time, saving countless lives and preventing enormous economic damage. Beyond these dramatic storms, TIROS 1 provided invaluable data on everyday weather systems, fronts, jet streams, and cloud patterns, dramatically improving the accuracy of short-term and long-range forecasts for agriculture, aviation, and shipping. The very way we planned our daily lives, from a family picnic to a transatlantic flight, was forever altered by this new, godlike view of the skies. Perhaps the most significant legacy of TIROS 1 was the paradigm shift it created in our relationship with the natural world. We moved from being passive victims of the weather to informed observers who could anticipate its changes. This satellite proved that space technology could offer direct, tangible benefits to every single person on the planet, fostering a new era of peaceful scientific satellites dedicated to Earth observation. The program's success paved the way for an entire fleet of weather satellites operated by nations around the world, creating a global cooperative network that shares vital data without regard for political borders. In a time of intense earthly division, this little satellite reminded us that the atmosphere connects us all, and that by working together and looking down from above, we could better protect the lives of everyone below. But as we learned to predict the weather from above, another satellite was being prepared not just to observe our world, but to connect it in a way that had never before been possible. The race to space was no longer just about national prestige or scientific discovery. It was about conquering the final frontier of human communication, time itself. For centuries, news and information traveled at the speed of ships, trains, and eventually radio waves that could only follow the curvature of the Earth. A major event happening on one side of the globe would be old news by the time it reached the other. This fundamental delay, this lag in our shared human experience, was the next barrier to fall, and it would happen not with a complex network of cables, but with a single, silent satellite positioned high above the Pacific Ocean. That satellite was Syncom 3, the culmination of a daring project by NASA and Hughes Aircraft Company. Its predecessors, Syncom 1 and 2, had been experimental pioneers. Syncom 1 was lost to a circuitry failure shortly after launch, while Syncom 2 successfully became the world's first geosynchronous satellite, meaning its orbital period matched the Earth's rotation, but its path was still a tilted figure 8 that moved north and south relative to the ground. Syncom 3's innovation was its perfectly circular orbit over the equator, achieved by a critical mid-course maneuver after launch. This placed it at an altitude of 22,300 miles, precisely where its orbital speed would exactly match the planet's rotation. From the perspective of anyone on Earth, Syncom 3 would appear to hang motionless in the sky, a fixed star of human making. It was the first true geostationary communication satellite, a permanent relay station in the heavens. This technological marvel found its perfect purpose in an event designed to bring the world together, the 1964 Summer Olympics in Tokyo. For the first time, the Games were to be held in Asia, and the vision was to share them live with a global audience. Before Syncom 3, such an idea was pure fantasy. Transoceanic television signals required elaborate and fragile chains of microwave towers and underwater coaxial cables, all of which introduced significant delay and limited capacity. Broadcasting live footage from Tokyo to the United States was simply not feasible with existing technology. Syncom 3 became the solution. The satellite was positioned to have a constant line-of-sight view of both Japan and North America, and NASA worked with the Communications Satellite Corporation to make it happen. The result was nothing short of magical. For viewers in the United States, the opening ceremonies of the Tokyo Olympics were not a report in the next day's newspaper. They were a shared live experience. They watched as Yoshinori Sakai, a young man born in Hiroshima on the day the atomic bomb was dropped, lit the Olympic cauldron, a powerful symbol of peace and rebirth transmitted instantaneously across the vast Pacific. They saw the thrilling competitions, the triumph of athletes like Abebe Bikila of Ethiopia winning his second consecutive marathon gold medal, and the sheer spectacle of the Games all as it happened. This wasn't just a television broadcast, it was a temporal miracle. The world suddenly felt much smaller, more intimate, and infinitely more connected. The impact of this single broadcast reverberated far beyond the realm of sports entertainment. It fundamentally altered our perception of time and distance in global communication. News, politics, and cultural moments could now be shared by a global audience simultaneously, fostering a new sense of global community and shared experience. The business world was revolutionized as well, as corporations could now hold international video conferences and transmit data across continents without relying on imperfect and delayed terrestrial systems. Syncom 3 and the Tokyo Olympics broadcast proved the immense commercial and social potential of satellite communications, directly catalyzing the creation of an entire new industry. It provided the undeniable proof of concept that led to the founding of the International Telecommunications Satellite Organization, Intelsat, later that same year, an international consortium dedicated to operating a global commercial satellite system. In one brilliant flash of technological triumph, a sporting event beamed from the sky had truly created the global village, setting the stage for the interconnected, instantly communicating world we live in today. While Syncom 3 was connecting our world in real time, another robotic explorer was embarking on a much longer journey, one that would disconnect us from a centuries-old fantasy and deliver a sobering dose of reality. For generations, the planet Mars had captured the human imagination like no other world. Through telescopes, astronomers like Percival Lowell meticulously mapped what they believed to be a vast network of canals, evidence of a desperate, intelligent civilization struggling to irrigate a dying world. This romantic vision of a neighboring planet, possibly teeming with life, was a staple of science fiction and scientific hypothesis alike. The true nature of the red planet remained one of our solar system's greatest mysteries, a blank canvas upon which we had painted our greatest hopes and fears for extraterrestrial life. That canvas was about to be completely repainted by a small, robotic probe called Mariner 4. The mission was a monumental technical challenge, launching a spacecraft on a 228-day journey across 134 million miles of interplanetary space required pinpoint precision. Mariner 4, a mere 575 pounds of aluminum and electronics, was equipped with a suite of scientific instruments, but its most crucial payload was a simple television camera connected to a digital tape recorder. Its mission was to fly within 6,000 miles of the Martian surface, take 22 pictures, store them on tape, and then slowly transmit that precious data back to eager scientists on Earth. The entire endeavor pushed the limits of 1960s computing, communications, and engineering. After a flawless launch in November of 1964, the spacecraft spent 7.5 months in the silent void, its systems quietly humming as it homed in on its target. On July 14, 1965, the day of the flyby, tension was sky-high at NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory. As Mariner 4 slipped behind Mars and all communication was lost for the planned 54 minutes, the team could only wait and hope. When the signal was required right on schedule, a wave of relief and exhilaration swept through the control room. The first successful encounter with Mars was a triumph. But the real story was stored on that magnetic tape. The transmission of the first image back to Earth was an agonizingly slow process, taking over 8 hours to complete. The team decided to convert the raw numerical data into numbers printed on strip paper, which an engineer then colored in with pastel crayons based on the data values to create a crude preliminary image. As that first picture slowly took shape, the romantic vision of Mars began to crumble. Instead of a world of lush vegetation and intelligent construction, Mariner 4's camera revealed a desolate, moon-like landscape pockmarked with impact craters. The images were grainy and low resolution by today's standards, but their message was stunningly clear. This was not a living world. The thin atmosphere, which the probe's other instruments confirmed was primarily carbon dioxide and far thinner than expected, offered no protection from solar radiation and the cold of space. The surface pressure was measured at a mere 4 to 7 millibars, effectively ruling out the possibility of liquid water, the essential ingredient for life as we know it. The canals of Lowell were revealed to be nothing more than an optical illusion, a trick of the eye when observing faint albedo features through Earth's turbulent atmosphere. In 22 pictures, Mariner 4 had not just visited another planet, it had fundamentally dismantled a cornerstone of astronomical mythology. The scientific and cultural impact was profound and immediate. The dream of a habitable Mars, a sister planet to Earth, was effectively dead. The discovery of a cratered surface also forced a dramatic re-evaluation of Martian geological history. Scientists had to confront the possibility that Mars was a far more ancient and static world than Earth, one where geological processes like plate tectonics had long ago ceased, leaving the surface frozen in time and scarred by eons of asteroid impact. This new, harsh reality was a disappointment to many, but it also refined our scientific curiosity. The search for life on Mars didn't end, it evolved. If complex life was impossible, perhaps microbial life had once existed when the planet was warmer and wetter. This question shifted the focus from the present to the ancient past, setting the stage for future missions like the Viking landers to search for fossils or chemical traces of long-extinct organisms. Mariner 4's flyby was a classic moment of scientific progress where a beautiful hypothesis was slain by an ugly, inconvenient fact, forcing us to look at our celestial neighbor with new, more discerning, and ultimately more truthful eyes. While the world was still absorbing the stark, cratered reality of Mars, the focus of the space race was swinging back to a much closer and more urgent prize, the Moon. By 1966, the political pressure to land a human there was immense, but a critical and terrifying question still remained unanswered. For centuries, astronomers had theorized about the nature of the lunar surface. Some prominent scientists, like Harvard's Thomas Gold, argued forcefully that the Moon was likely covered in a layer of incredibly fine, deep dust. He postulated that eons of meteorite impacts and solar radiation had pulverized the lunar rock into a substance with the consistency of talcum powder, perhaps hundreds of feet deep. If this theory were true, any spacecraft attempting to land would simply be swallowed whole, vanishing into a silent, dusty sea without a trace. Sending astronauts there would be a suicide mission. This wasn't just an academic debate, it was a massive engineering uncertainty that threatened to halt the entire Apollo program in its tracks. the Soviets, relentless in their lunar ambitions, were determined to be the first to find out the truth. Their answer was Luna 9, a robust spherical lander designed for one incredibly daring purpose: to survive. Unlike the American strategy of high-speed impactors, the Soviet plan was to execute a soft landing, a concept that had never been successfully attempted on another celestial body. The challenges were staggering. The spacecraft had to fire its retro-rocket at precisely the right moment to kill its tremendous velocity, then survive the final drop onto an unknown surface. The Luna 9 design was brilliant in its relative simplicity. After the braking rocket slowed the main descent module, a smaller, weighted capsule was ejected just seconds before impact. This 70-pound sphere, encased in airbags, hit the surface and bounced and rolled until it came to a stop. Then, like a mechanical flower blooming in the alien void, 4 petal-like panels opened outward to stabilize the craft and expose its cameras to the stark lunar landscape. The tension during the landing on February 3, 1966, was palpable, even from a distance of 239,000 miles. When the signals confirmed that Luna 9 had not only landed but was actively transmitting data, it was a staggering triumph for the Soviet space program. But the drama was not over. The Soviets, typically secretive, began transmitting the photographic data in a slow-scan television format using a non-standard frequency. At the Jodrell Bank Observatory in England, astronomer Bernard Lovell and his team quickly realized what was happening. Using their massive radio telescope, they intercepted the signal, and recognizing it was a standard format used by British newspapers for wire photos, they rushed to borrow a suitable facsimile machine from the nearby Daily Express newspaper. In an incredible moment of scientific improvisation, the first panoramic images of the lunar surface were developed not in a Soviet control room, but in an English observatory, and they were promptly splashed across front pages around the free world before Moscow had even released their own official versions. Those first grainy, black and white panoramas were worth more than any scientific instrument reading. They showed a rugged, pebble-strewn surface dotted with small craters and rocks of various sizes. Most importantly, the lander itself had not sunk. The footpads of the open panels were clearly visible, resting firmly on the ground. The texture appeared firm and granular, like coarse sand or soil, not a bottomless pit of dust. Thomas Gould's theory was conclusively disproven. The moon could be walked upon. This single piece of visual evidence was arguably one of the most critical pieces of intelligence gathered in the entire space race. It provided the green light NASA desperately needed, proving that their lunar module design, with its wide, round footpads, had a fighting chance of staying upright on the surface. Luna 9's success didn't just deliver photographs, it delivered confidence, erasing a fundamental fear and replacing it with a clear, navigable reality. The path for Apollo was now open, all thanks to a resilient Soviet sphere that showed us the ground beneath our feet was solid, waiting for the next visitors to arrive. Yet, even as the superpowers raced toward the moon, a chilling realization was dawning on leaders in both Washington and Moscow. The same breathtaking technology that allowed for planetary exploration and heroic orbital flights also possessed a terrifying dual-use potential. The rockets that launched satellites and capsules could also deliver nuclear warheads. The orbiting vehicles that photographed weather patterns could just as easily house weapons of mass destruction. The celestial sphere, once a realm of pure wonder, was in danger of becoming the ultimate high ground for warfare, an escalation that could render the entire Earth indefensible. This shared, grim understanding created a rare moment of pragmatic alignment between two ideological enemies, leading to one of the most profound and lasting diplomatic achievements of the Cold War, the Outer Space Treaty of 1967. The treaty's formal name, the Treaty on Principles Governing the Activities of States in the Exploration and Use of Outer Space, including the Moon and other celestial bodies, outlined its sweeping ambition. Its negotiation was not born from a sudden spirit of global cooperation, but from cold, hard necessity. Both the US and the USSR had independently researched the possibility of placing nuclear weapons in orbit, and both had concluded that while it was technically feasible, it would be catastrophically destabilizing. A bomb in space could strike any target on Earth with virtually no warning, making a first strike almost irresistible and a retaliatory strike nearly impossible. The concept of mutually assured destruction, which kept a fragile peace on Earth, would completely break down in the face of such a weapon. The near disaster of the Cuban Missile Crisis had already shown both nations how quickly they could stumble toward the abyss. Weaponizing space was a step they realized neither could afford to take. The resulting treaty, which opened for signature on January 27, 1967, and was rapidly ratified by the major spacefaring nations, established a revolutionary legal framework for humanity's future in space. Its core principles were bold and forward-thinking. It declared that the exploration and use of outer space should be carried out for the benefit of all countries, irrespective of their degree of economic or scientific development, and that it would be the province of all mankind. This simple phrase was a direct rebuke to the colonial, land-grab mentality that had defined so much of human history. No nation could claim sovereignty over the moon or any other celestial body by means of use, occupation, or any other measure. You could plant a flag, but you couldn't claim the territory as your own. Most critically, the treaty explicitly banned the placement of weapons of mass destruction in orbit around Earth, on the Moon, or on any other celestial body. It also prohibited the establishment of military bases, the testing of any type of weapon, and the conduct of military maneuvers on these celestial surfaces. Importantly, it did not ban all military activity in space. Reconnaissance satellites, for instance, were considered a peaceful use and were allowed to continue, a loophole that would become strategically vital for both sides. The treaty also established that states are responsible for their national activities in space, whether carried out by governmental or non-governmental entities, and are liable for any damage caused by their space objects. It mandated that astronauts be considered envoys of mankind, and required all parties to provide them with all possible assistance in the event of an accident, distress, or emergency landing. The impact of this foundational document cannot be overstated. It successfully prevented the nuclear arms race from expanding into the cosmos, arguably one of the greatest diplomatic achievements in human history. It created a stable, predictable legal environment that allowed the Apollo program to proceed without the fear of a military confrontation on the lunar surface. It has served as the bedrock of international space law for over half a century, a framework that has been expanded upon but never replaced. Every private satellite, every robotic rover on Mars, and every expedition to the International Space Station operates under the principles laid out in this treaty. It represents a profound moment of foresight and self-preservation, where humanity collectively decided that the heavens would be a realm for discovery and cooperation, not conquest and conflict. It was a promise we made to our future selves, ensuring that the final frontier would remain a place of wonder, not a battlefield. With the legal and physical pathways to the moon now clear, the stage was set for humanity's most daring journey yet. But the final months of 1968 were anything but peaceful on Earth. The world was gripped by profound social and political turmoil. The Vietnam War raged, anti-war protests filled the streets of America and Europe, and both the assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy had left a deep scar of grief and anger. The space program, once a beacon of national pride, was facing its own pressures. The Soviet Union was suspected of preparing a manned flight around the moon, and NASA, still reeling from the tragic Apollo 1 fire that killed 3 astronauts, desperately needed a bold mission to regain momentum and prove the Saturn V rocket was ready. The decision was made to roll the dice on an audacious, high-risk mission, sending Apollo 8 not just into Earth orbit but all the way to the Moon and back. The crew, commanded by veteran astronaut Frank Borman with James Lovell as command module pilot and William Anders as lunar module pilot, was embarking on a journey no human had ever taken. Their mission was to fly 250,000 miles to the Moon, enter its orbit, circle it 10 times and return home. The risks were almost unimaginable. They would be riding the massive, still largely unproven Saturn V rocket, which had only flown twice before, never with a crew. If its third stage failed to ignite to push them out of Earth orbit, they would be stranded in a useless elliptical path. If it burned too long, they could crash into the Moon or be flung into the endless void of solar orbit. Once there, a single errant firing of their engine could send them crashing into the lunar far side, forever out of contact with mission control. They were in essence pioneers sailing into a completely unknown sea with only their charts and calculations to guide them. The launch on December 21st was flawless, and the transit to the Moon was a tense but smooth journey. The most critical moment came on Christmas Eve as the spacecraft disappeared behind the Moon for the first time. For 36 minutes, they were utterly alone, cut off from all communication with Earth. If their single engine burn to enter lunar orbit failed, no one would ever know. The entire world held its breath, waiting for the moment the spacecraft would hopefully re-emerge. When Frank Borman's voice finally crackled through the static, "Please be informed there is a Santa Claus," a wave of relief and joy swept across the globe. They had made it. As they began their orbits, the crew became the first humans to lay eyes on the far side of the Moon, describing a stark, battered, and lifeless terrain. But it was during their fourth orbit that something unplanned and utterly transformative occurred. As the module rotated, Bill Anders happened to glance out of a hatch window. What he saw caused him to gasp and fumble for his black and white camera. There, rising over the barren, grey horizon of the Moon, was a magnificent swirl of blue and white, a vibrant, beautiful, and fragile-looking oasis in the blackness of space. It was Earth. Anders quickly snapped a black and white photo, but he knew it couldn't capture the breathtaking color. "Hand me that color film, will you?" he said urgently to Jim Lovell. In a frantic, beautiful moment of shared awe, the astronauts scrambled to load the color film cartridge, each man desperate to capture this sight for all of humanity. Anders finally took the now iconic color photograph, with the desolate lunar surface in the foreground and our delicate planet hanging in the infinite void. Frank Borman would later say the sight made him realize that everything he had ever known, every person, every country, every war, was contained on that small, fragile sphere. The photograph, dubbed Earthrise, was transmitted back to a world that was deeply divided and embroiled in conflict. Its impact was immediate and profound. For the first time, we saw ourselves not as citizens of separate nations, but as crew members on a single spaceship, sharing a finite and vulnerable home. The image provided a visceral, emotional understanding of the overview effect that Yuri Gagarin had tried to describe. It showed no borders, no signs of human strife or division, only dazzling oceans, swirling weather systems, and a thin, glowing atmosphere that looked impossibly delicate. This was not the Earth of maps and politics. This was the Earth as it truly is, a lonely, beautiful haven of life in a cold and empty universe. The cultural and environmental impact of this single image is almost impossible to overstate. It became the cover of Time magazine and was printed in newspapers across the planet. It was credited with helping to end the 60s on a note of hope and unity, a much-needed symbol of what we could achieve when we worked together. Most significantly, it is widely considered the catalyst for the modern environmental movement. That one picture made abstract concepts like Spaceship Earth and global ecosystem suddenly tangible. It gave the movement its most powerful emblem, a vision of our shared home's stunning beauty and undeniable fragility. The first Earth Day was organized just 16 months later, in 1970, galvanized by this new planetary consciousness. The Apollo 8 mission was a monumental technical achievement, but its greatest gift to humanity wasn't a better understanding of the moon. It was a radically new and desperately needed understanding of ourselves. Yet just 8 months after the profound perspective shift of Apollo 8, the world was poised for an even greater leap. The audacious goal set by President Kennedy less than a decade earlier was now within reach. The Apollo 11 mission represented the culmination of a staggering national effort involving hundreds of thousands of engineers, scientists, and technicians, all focused on a single objective: landing humans on the lunar surface and returning them safely to Earth. The crew, Commander Neil Armstrong, Command Module Pilot Michael Collins, and Lunar Module Pilot Edwin "Buzz" Aldrin, embodied the perfect blend of cool-headed test pilot courage and meticulous scientific curiosity. Their journey began not with a sense of inevitability, but with the full knowledge that they were attempting what many still considered impossible. The launch on July 16, 1969, was a global spectacle witnessed by millions on live television. The thunderous ascent of the Saturn V rocket, a vehicle as tall as a 36-story building, was a visceral display of raw power carrying the hopes of a species. The 3-day transit to the moon was largely uneventful, a period of careful system checks and quiet reflection. The real drama began on July 20th as the Command Module Columbia, with Michael Collins alone aboard, continued to orbit while the Lunar Module Eagle, with Armstrong and Aldrin, separated and began its daring descent. For the first several minutes, the process was smooth, guided by computer automation. Then, alarms began to blare. A code 1202 flashed on their computer display, indicating an overloaded system. With heart rate soaring, the crew and mission control had mere seconds to assess the threat. A young flight controller in Houston, Steve Bales, quickly determined it was a minor radar processing issue and gave a gut-wrenching go for continued descent. The crisis was averted, but a far greater one was just moments away. Armstrong, peering out his small triangular window, realized the computer's automated landing trajectory was taking them directly into a football field-sized crater littered with boulders the size of cars. With fuel levels dipping dangerously low and only moments of hover time remaining, he took manual control. With a calm that defied the immense pressure, he flew the Eagle like a helicopter, skimming over the hazardous terrain, searching for a safe patch of level ground. Back in mission control, the tension was suffocating. Capsule communicator Charlie Duke could only listen as Armstrong's steady voice reported his progress, each second burning precious fuel. They were now seconds away from an abort, which would have meant jettisoning the descent stage and firing the ascent engine to blast back into orbit, a catastrophic failure of the primary mission. With under 30 seconds of fuel remaining, Aldrin called out, "Contact light." A sensor on one of the lander's legs had touched the surface. "Okay." "Engine stop," Armstrong said. After a heartbeat of silence, he delivered the most famous understatement in human history. "Tranquility Base here, the Eagle has landed." The relief in mission control was explosive, with Charlie Duke replying with a voice cracking with emotion. "Roger, Tranquility, we copy you on the ground. You got a bunch of guys about to turn blue, we're breathing again." The world held its breath once more that evening as the astronauts prepared for their moonwalk. When the hatch opened and Armstrong began his slow, backward climb down the ladder, an estimated 600 million people across the globe were glued to their television sets, representing the largest shared experience in human history to that point. As he stepped off the footpad onto the surface, his words, "That's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind," became instantly eternal, perfectly capturing the duality of the moment, a single human action representing the collective ambition of all humanity. The grainy, ghostly black and white images that followed were almost surreal. A human being was walking, hopping, and working on another world. Buzz Aldrin joined him shortly after, describing the view as magnificent desolation, a phrase that captured both the stunning achievement and the stark, lifeless reality of the lunar environment. For the next 2.5 hours, the two astronauts conducted their tasks with an efficiency born of relentless training. They planted a nylon American flag stiffened with wires to appear as if it were waving in a non-existent breeze, a poignant symbol of national pride with an achievement for all mankind. They collected over 46 pounds of lunar rocks and soil, a scientific treasure trove that would forever change our understanding of the solar system's origins. They deployed a suite of experiments, including a seismometer to measure moonquakes and a laser reflector that would allow scientists to measure the precise distance between the Earth and the Moon for decades to come. They also took a phone call from President Richard Nixon, who spoke to them from the Oval Office, labeling it the most historic telephone call ever made. Every movement was watched with rapt attention by a global audience, temporarily uniting people across political, cultural, and ideological divides in a shared moment of awe and pride. The safe return and splashdown in the Pacific Ocean on July 24th marked the flawless completion of arguably the greatest exploratory journey ever undertaken. The cultural impact was immediate and profound. The three astronauts were catapulted to a level of global fame rarely seen, embarking on a world tour where they were greeted not as American heroes but as human heroes. The mission demonstrated an incredible capacity for peaceful technological achievement, proving that with immense focus, resources, and willpower, humanity could accomplish the seemingly impossible. It served as a powerful counter-narrative to the strife and division of the 1960s, offering a glimpse of what we could achieve through cooperation and reason. Scientifically, the rock samples brought home forced a complete rewrite of lunar geology, leading to the widely accepted giant impact hypothesis that the Moon was formed from debris after a Mars-sized body collided with the early Earth. The Apollo 11 landing was more than a mission. It was a punctuation mark in human history, a definitive before and after. It was the moment we ceased to be a single-planet species and truly began our voyage into the cosmos, forever changing our perception of what we are capable of achieving. If Apollo 11 was humanity's triumphant arrival on the Moon, then Apollo 13 was the harrowing, heart-stopping journey that reminded us just how perilous that voyage truly was. Launched on April 11, 1970, the mission was initially considered by the public to be almost routine, the third lunar landing attempt. The crew, Commander Jim Lovell, Command Module Pilot Jack Swigert, and Lunar Module Pilot Fred Hayes, were seasoned professionals on what was expected to be a scientifically focused, if less publicly dramatic, flight. That perception shattered 55 hours and 55 minutes into the mission, just after the crew finished a live television broadcast showing life aboard the spacecraft. The command was given to stir the oxygen tanks, a routine procedure to prevent the supercold gas from settling into layers. What followed was not a gentle shift, but a deafening bang that shook the entire spacecraft. Moments later, astronaut Jack Swigert uttered the phrase that would become etched into history, though often misquoted: "Houston, we've had a problem." The bang was an explosion. One of the two oxygen tanks in the service module had violently ruptured. Within moments, warning lights illuminated across the control panels. The electrical power in the command module began to fail, and the pressure in the oxygen tanks plummeted towards zero. The astronauts watched in stunned disbelief as the primary source of their breathable air and electrical power literally vented into the void of space. They were 200,000 miles from Earth, and their ship was critically wounded. The lunar landing was instantly and obviously cancelled. The mission was no longer about exploration. It was now a desperate and unprecedented struggle for survival. The objective shifted in a heartbeat from walking on the Moon to simply making it back home alive. The challenges were almost insurmountable. the command module Odyssey was dying, its lifeblood of oxygen and power bleeding away. Their only hope lay in using the lunar module Aquarius, which was still intact, as an improvised lifeboat. But Aquarius was designed to support 2 men for 2 days on a lunar landing, not 3 men for a 4-day journey back to Earth. It lacked the necessary filters to scrub carbon dioxide from the air for that long. Its power was limited, and it had no heat shield for re-entry. Every system had to be meticulously managed and conserved. Guided by an army of engineers on the ground working around the clock, the crew powered down Odyssey completely to preserve its precious battery power for the final re-entry, a maneuver that had never been tested. They shut down nearly all systems in Aquarius to save power, transforming the cramped, cold module into a dark and frigid refuge where temperatures eventually dropped to near freezing. The crew suffered from dehydration and were forced to ration their water supply, with Fred Hayes developing a serious kidney infection from the ordeal. Perhaps the most iconic example of on-the-fly ingenuity was solving the carbon dioxide problem. The square lithium hydroxide canisters from the dead command module were incompatible with the round openings in Aquarius's system. As carbon dioxide levels began to rise to dangerous, sleep-inducing levels, a team on the ground was given a mock-up of every item the crew had on board: duct tape, plastic bags, cardboard, hoses from spacesuits, and told to devise a solution. In a matter of hours, they engineered an adapter nicknamed the mailbox. Using these random parts, they then read up the intricate, step-by-step instructions to the exhausted crew, who carefully assembled the jerry-rigged device that ultimately saved them from poisoning themselves with their own exhaled breath. It was a breathtaking display of real-time, collaborative problem-solving under the most extreme pressure imaginable. The final, nail-biting act was the power-up of the command module. No one knew if its systems, which had been frozen in the deep cold of space for days, would even reactivate. If they failed, the crew would be incinerated upon re-entry or would skip off the atmosphere and be lost forever in space. As the astronauts followed the extensive power-up procedures radioed from Houston, a collective hope held the world in its grip. One by one, the systems flickered to life. The world watched on live television as the damaged spacecraft, with its 3 brave astronauts, splashed down safely in the South Pacific Ocean. The successful return of Apollo 13 was immediately dubbed a successful failure. The mission had failed in its original objective, but it had succeeded in demonstrating the absolute peak of human courage, teamwork, and ingenuity. The phrase "failure is not an option," though coined by flight director Gene Kranz after the mission, perfectly encapsulated the determined spirit of the entire team on the ground. The impact of Apollo 13 reverberated far beyond the space program. It became a universal lesson in crisis management, studied in business schools and military academies for its flawless example of calm leadership, decentralized problem-solving, and relentless innovation under duress. It also sparked a remarkable wave of international solidarity. Nations that were typically Cold War adversaries, including the Soviet Union, offered assistance and tracked the spacecraft, with some even standing by with ships for potential recovery efforts. For a few tense days, the world put aside its earthly divisions to will 3 fellow humans home. The near disaster forced a complete redesign of the Apollo spacecraft's oxygen tank systems and a major overhaul of NASA's safety culture, ensuring that the lessons learned from this brush with tragedy would make all future missions safer. Apollo 13 proved that while technology could fail, the human spirit, when properly focused and united by a common purpose, could perform miracles. While the drama of Apollo 13 showcased the perilous nature of journeys to the moon, another, quieter revolution was taking place in Earth orbit. One focused not on fleeting visits, but on establishing a permanent human presence in the cosmos. The goal shifted from planting a flag to creating a home. On April 19, 1971, the Soviet Union once again seized a monumental first, launching not a probe or a capsule, but an entirely new class of vehicle, the world's first space station. They named it Salyut-1, meaning salute or fireworks, a celebratory title for a bold and complex engineering achievement. This cylindrical module, over 65 feet long and weighing nearly 20 tons, was designed to be a scientific outpost, a place where cosmonauts could live and work in space for weeks, conducting experiments impossible during short orbital flights. The station's design was a masterpiece of efficiency and foresight. It was divided into multiple compartments, a transfer section for docking, a main work and living area, and a service module housing the engines and vital support systems. For the first time, a spacecraft was outfitted not just for survival but for habitation. It contained exercise equipment to combat muscle atrophy in weightlessness, a dining table with food warmers, comfortable sleeping bags, and even a library and chess set for leisure time. Large portholes offered stunning views of Earth, and a powerful telescope named Orion was mounted for astronomical observations. Salyut-1 represented a giant leap from the cramped, utilitarian capsules of the past toward a vision of humanity living and thriving in space. The first crew to attempt to board this new home was launched aboard Soyuz 10 just 3 days after Salyut reached orbit. The mission, however, was plagued with problems. The Soyuz capsule successfully docked with the station, but a critical flaw in the docking mechanism meant the cosmonauts could not open the hatch to enter. After being stuck attached to the station for over 5 hours, they were forced to undock and return to Earth, their mission a frustrating failure. The pressure was now immense on the backup crew of Soyuz 11. Commander Georgy Dobrovolsky, flight engineer Vladislav Volkov, and test engineer Viktor Patsayev. Their successful launch on June 6 seemed to mark a turning point. They executed a flawless docking and, to the jubilation of Soviet mission control, became the first humans to enter and inhabit a space station. For 23 days, the 3 men lived aboard Salyut-1, setting a new endurance record and proving that long-duration spaceflight was possible. They conducted a rigorous schedule of scientific and medical experiments, studied Earth's resources, and tested the station's systems. Their daily television broadcast showed a new, relatable side to space travel. Men working, eating, and joking in their orbital home, a powerful propaganda victory for the Soviet Union. Everything seemed to be proceeding perfectly, and on June 29, after a highly successful mission, they boarded their Soyuz capsule, undocked from the station, and began the routine journey back to Earth. As their descent module streaked through the atmosphere, recovery helicopters circled the expected landing zone in Kazakhstan, ready to celebrate the returning heroes. The first sign that something was horribly wrong was the silence. The parachutes deployed normally, and the capsule made a perfect, soft landing. But when the recovery team rushed to open the hatch, they found all 3 cosmonauts motionless in their couches. They had not responded to any radio calls during the final minutes of descent, and now they showed no signs of life. Attempts at resuscitation were futile. The world, which had been following their successful mission, was stunned by the tragic news. The 3 cosmonauts, who had just spent nearly a month in space in good health and high spirits, were dead. The subsequent investigation uncovered a catastrophic and heartbreakingly simple engineering flaw. A pressure equalization valve in the Soyuz spacecraft had been designed to open automatically at a low altitude to equalize the cabin pressure with the outside air. Tragically, this valve jerked open violently much earlier than planned, at an altitude of 168 kilometers, when the descent module separated from its service module. The cabin explosively decompressed in less than a minute. The sudden loss of pressure would have caused the men to lose consciousness within seconds and succumb to the vacuum of space shortly after. They were not wearing pressurized spacesuits, as the cabin was considered a shirt-sleeve environment, and the Soyuz design had never required them for re-entry. It was a devastating design oversight with the most dire consequences. The Soviet Union mourned the loss of its cosmonauts with a state funeral, their ashes interred in the Kremlin wall. The Soyuz program was immediately grounded for over 2 years as the spacecraft was completely redesigned with a focus on safety, most notably by mandating that all cosmonauts wear pressurized Sokol survival suits during launch and re-entry, a rule that remains in effect to this day. Despite its tragic conclusion, the legacy of Salyut 1 is profound and enduring. It pioneered the very concept of a space station, demonstrating that humans could not only travel through space but could also live there for extended periods, conducting meaningful scientific work. The data gathered on the effects of long-duration weightlessness on the human body became invaluable for planning future missions. The Soviet program, undeterred by the disaster, learned from its mistakes and went on to launch a series of successful civilian and military Salyut stations, culminating in the remarkable Mir station, which would become a symbol of long-term human presence in space. Salyut 1's greatest contribution was proving that the dream of a home in orbit was achievable, laying the foundational engineering and operational groundwork for the international cooperative efforts that would eventually build the International Space Station, a direct descendant of that first, brave and tragic outpost in the sky. The stark, cratered Mars revealed by Mariner 4 had painted a picture of a dead, moon-like world, a profound disappointment that seemed to close the door on the planet's mysteries. But science is a process of peeling back layers, and just 6 years later, a new emissary was sent to take a much longer, more detailed look. That spacecraft was Mariner 9, and its mission was not a brief fly-by but a true commitment to become the first human-made object to orbit another planet. This shift from a fleeting glimpse to a sustained observation would completely shatter the simplistic view of Mars and reveal a world of breathtaking, Earth-like complexity that no one had anticipated. Launched on May 30, 1971, Mariner 9 was a technological leap forward. It carried a more powerful camera system and a suite of instruments designed to study the Martian surface and atmosphere over a prolonged period. Its journey was a race against a Soviet counterpart, Mars 2, which was launched just days earlier. The prize was the historic title of First Orbiter. Mariner 9 won that race, successfully firing its engine to enter Martian orbit on November 14, becoming the first spacecraft to ever orbit another world. But its triumphant arrival was met with a frustrating sight. Instead of the detailed geological features scientists hoped to map, the entire planet was obscured by a featureless tan-colored haze. A planet-wide dust storm of unimaginable scale was raging, completely enveloping Mars and hiding all its secrets. The initial photographs sent back showed nothing but a blank ball with 4 dark spots poking through the murk. It was like arriving at a long-awaited destination only to find it shrouded in the thickest possible fog. Faced with this unforeseen obstacle, the mission team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory made a critical and patient decision. Instead of wasting precious fuel and camera film on a featureless world, they put the spacecraft into a waiting game. For over a month, Mariner 9 silently circled the red planet, its cameras mostly idle, as scientists on Earth anxiously monitored weather data, waiting for the global tempest to subside. This period of forced patience was agonizing but ultimately proved to be a strategic masterpiece. As the dust gradually began to settle, the 4 mysterious dark spots revealed themselves to be not mere blemishes, but the tips of colossal volcanic peaks towering so high above the plains that they pierced the upper reaches of the dust storm. These were the Tharsis volcanoes, and one of them, Olympus Mons, was soon recognized as the largest volcano in the entire solar system, a shield volcano so massive that its base would cover the entire state of Arizona, and its summit would soar nearly 16 miles into the thin Martian sky. This was merely the first revelation. As the atmosphere continued to clear, the cameras unveiled an even more staggering feature, a gargantuan canyon system slashing across the Martian equator like a monstrous scar. This was Valles Marineris, named in honor of the spacecraft that discovered it. It dwarfed any canyon on Earth. The Grand Canyon could easily be lost in just one of its side channels. Stretching over 2,500 miles long, up to 400 miles wide, and plunging over 4 miles deep in places, this immense chasm pointed to a violent and geologically active past for Mars, a direct contradiction to the static, cratered world scientists had previously imagined. The most profound discoveries, however, were the clues to Mars's wet history. Mariner 9's sharp eyes spotted what appeared to be dry riverbeds and channels, networks of tributaries that looked eerily similar to water-carved features on Earth. It photographed enormous outflow channels that seemed to have been created by catastrophic floods, and it even captured images of what looked like ancient lake beds and deltas. These features were unmistakable evidence that liquid water had once flowed freely on the Martian surface. The planet was not always the frozen, arid desert it is today. It had a warmer, thicker atmosphere and a hydrologic cycle. This single realization was the mission's most transformative contribution. It forced a complete and utter rewrite of every textbook on Martian geology and astrobiology. The question was no longer if Mars ever had the conditions for life, but when, for how long, and what kind of life might have arisen there. Mariner 9 didn't just map a planet, it revolutionized our understanding of it. It revealed a world of dramatic extremes and a complex geological history that paralleled Earth's in surprising ways. The mission demonstrated the immense value of orbital reconnaissance, of studying a world over time rather than in a single snapshot. It provided the crucial geological context that would guide the selection of landing sites for the Viking missions just 5 years later, turning them from shots in the dark into targeted searches for life. By waiting out a global storm, Mariner 9 gave us a new Mars, a world that was once dynamic, Earth-like, and hauntingly familiar, forever cementing its place as a world worth exploring in meticulous, painstaking detail. For all the profound insights gained from looking outward at other worlds, one of the most transformative applications of space technology would soon be found in turning our gaze back upon our own planet with an entirely new level of clarity and purpose. While weather satellites like Tyros had given us a view of our atmosphere, and spy satellites provided secretive tactical views, a comprehensive scientific understanding of Earth's land surface remained out of reach. That all changed on July 23, 1972, with the launch of the Earth Resources Technology satellite, later renamed Landsat-1. This was not a satellite designed for military advantage or meteorological prediction. It was the first civilian spacecraft built for the singular, peaceful purpose of observing and understanding the health of our planet's landscapes from a global perspective. The technology aboard Landsat-1 was revolutionary for its time. Its key instrument was the multispectral scanner system, or MSS, a device that didn't just take simple photographs. Instead, it captured image data simultaneously in 4 distinct spectral bands, green and red in the visible light spectrum, and 2 bands in the near-infrared spectrum, which is invisible to the human eye. This capability was its true superpower. Healthy vegetation, for instance, reflects a tremendous amount of infrared light, while stressed or dying plants reflect much less. Water, on the other hand, absorbs infrared light almost completely. By analyzing the data from these different bands, scientists could now distinguish between a thriving forest and a diseased one, between a shallow, sediment-filled river and a deep, clear lake, and between different types of rock and soil, all with a clarity and objectivity that was previously impossible. For the first time, we had a consistent, unbiased tool to measure the Earth's vital signs. The impact of this new, data-rich perspective was nothing short of revolutionary across countless fields. In agriculture, Landsat imagery allowed for the first large-scale crop monitoring. Analysts could identify different crop types, assess their health, predict yields, and even detect the early stages of drought or pest infestation before they were visible to a farmer walking the fields. This moved farming from a reactive practice to a predictive science, enabling better food security and resource allocation. In forestry, the satellite provided an accurate, comprehensive inventory of the world's timber resources, mapping clear cutting and deforestation with undeniable evidence, thus igniting the modern global conservation movement. Geologists used the data to identify mineral deposits and map fault lines, while hydrologists tracked glacial retreat, snowpack levels, and watershed changes with unprecedented precision. Perhaps the most profound and enduring legacy of Landsat-1 was the creation of a continuous, unbroken record of our changing planet. By imaging the same areas of the globe every 18 days, it established a baseline, a pristine digital snapshot of the Earth in the early 1970s. This time series became an invaluable tool for measuring change over time. Scientists could now quantify the rapid expansion of cities, the relentless spread of deserts, the alarming retreat of polar ice caps, and the gradual shrinking of rainforests. This objective, orbital view presented irrefutable evidence of humanity's impact on a global scale, providing the crucial data needed to inform environmental policy and sustainable resource management decisions. It transformed the often abstract concept of global change into a measurable, documented reality, empowering a new generation of scientists and policymakers with the hard facts needed to advocate for the protection of our planet. While our robotic eyes were beginning to map the changing face of our own planet, another, far more ambitious probe was being prepared not just to observe, but to leave our planetary system entirely. This was Pioneer 10, a mission of profound firsts. Its primary objectives were staggering: to become the first spacecraft to travel through the treacherous asteroid belt, a region many feared would shred it to pieces, and then to conduct the first ever direct observations of Jupiter, the solar system's giant, from within its ferocious radiation belts. But beyond these incredible engineering goals, Pioneer 10 carried something far more profound, a payload not of science instruments but of hope and symbolism, a golden calling card for humanity. The brainchild of astronomers Carl Sagan and Frank Drake, the Pioneer plaque was a bold and beautiful attempt to solve an unimaginable puzzle. How do you introduce the human race to an intelligence that may share no common language, biology, or frame of reference? Etched onto a 6 by 9-inch gold anodized aluminum plate, the message was a masterpiece of scientific communication and optimistic speculation. Sagan and Drake had to design something that was universally decipherable, relying only on the fundamental constants of the universe, mathematics and physics. At the heart of the plaque is a fundamental diagram representing the hyperfine transition of neutral hydrogen, the most abundant element in the cosmos. This provides a universal unit of length and time, a baseline that any technologically advanced civilization should be able to understand. To the left of this is a schematic of our solar system, showing the Sun and its planets, with a small line drawing of Pioneer 10 itself arcing away from the third planet, Earth, and passing by the fifth planet, Jupiter, clearly indicating its origin and journey. Most poignantly, a small mark on the line showing the spacecraft's path points directly back to Earth, a cosmic "you are here" dot for anyone who finds it. But the most captivating elements are the figures of a human man and woman, drawn in a simple, unadorned line style. The man has his hand raised in a gesture of peaceful greeting, a universal signal that transcends culture. Their proportions are mathematically defined relative to the spacecraft diagram above them, providing a scale. This depiction, while groundbreaking, was not without controversy. Some criticized the nudity of the figures as unnecessarily provocative, while others in the scientific community questioned the entire endeavor as a futile, almost childish gesture given the incomprehensible distances between the stars. Yet the power of the Pioneer plaque far outweighed the critiques. It was humanity's first deliberate attempt to communicate our existence to the cosmos, a message in a bottle cast into the vast ocean of interstellar space. It represented a monumental shift in perspective. We were no longer just passive observers of the universe. We were active participants, a young species reaching out from our cradle and announcing, "We are here." This tiny golden plaque transformed Pioneer 10 from a mere interplanetary probe into an interstellar ambassador, carrying the essence of our curiosity, our science, and our form out into the galaxy, a permanent testament to our existence long after our civilization is gone. Following the tragic lessons of Soyuz 11, the American space program was determined to prove that long-duration life in orbit was not only possible, but could be productive and scientifically invaluable. The answer was Skylab, a bold repurposing of Apollo-era hardware into the United States' first space station. Conceived from the upper stage of a massive Saturn V rocket, Skylab was a workshop, an observatory, and a home all in one, a testament to pragmatic engineering and ambitious science. Its launch on May 14, 1973, was meant to be a flawless beginning to a new era of orbital residence. Instead, it very nearly ended the entire program before the first crew could even arrive. Just 63 seconds into its ascent, a catastrophic oversight became horrifyingly apparent. The spacecraft's vital micrometeoroid shield, which also served as a sunshade to regulate the station's internal temperature, had prematurely deployed due to aerodynamic forces and was violently torn away by the supersonic slipstream. This single event triggered a cascading disaster. The shield's loss took with it one of the station's two main solar array wings. The debris from the event then likely jammed the remaining solar array, preventing it from fully deploying. As Skylab achieved orbit, it was a wounded giant, critically underpowered and baking in the unfiltered sun, its internal temperatures soaring past 130 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to ruin food, medicine, film, and even warp plastic components, making the station uninhabitable. Back on Earth, NASA faced an unprecedented crisis. They had a 275-ton, 85-foot-long station in orbit that was essentially a useless, overheating hulk. The first crewed mission, Skylab 2, was immediately postponed for 10 days as engineers at Marshall Space Flight Center and Johnson Space Center worked around the clock on an audacious rescue plan. They had to figure out how to cool the station down and how to generate enough power to run it, all through a series of complex, untested, and dangerous spacewalks. The entire Skylab program now hinged on the ability of its first crew commander Charles "Pete" Conrad, science pilot Joseph Kerwin, and pilot Paul Weitz to perform what amounted to emergency orbital surgery. When the Apollo Command Module carrying the 3 astronauts rendezvoused with Skylab, the sight was daunting. The missing solar panel was a glaring wound, and the remnants of the micrometeoroid shield were visibly crumpled and jammed against the station's hull, preventing the remaining solar wing from deploying. Their first task was to try and free it. Paul Weitz stood in the open command module hatch while Conrad held the spacecraft steady just feet from the station. Weitz used a 10-foot pole with a cutter on the end to try and pry the metal debris loose, but the attempt failed. The spacecraft kept bouncing away from the station in a frustrating demonstration of Newton's third law. It was clear the problem would require a full spacewalk. A few days later, after carefully docking and cautiously testing the habitability of the slowly cooling workshop, Conrad and Kerwin ventured outside. Their mission was twofold: deploy a makeshift parasail sunshade through a small scientific airlock to cool the station, and then free the jammed solar array. The sunshade deployment, a canvas and aluminum umbrella designed by NASA engineers in a matter of days, was a tense but stunning success. Almost immediately, temperatures inside Skylab began to drop to a comfortable, livable range. The second task was far more perilous. Conrad and Kerwin had to maneuver themselves to the side of the station where the solar array was pinned. Using a set of cable cutters on a long pole, they had to snap the stubborn metal strap that was holding the array down. It was a feat of pure brute strength in the frictionless environment of space. With Conrad anchoring Kerwin's legs to provide leverage, Kerwin struggled with the cutter, his heart rate soaring with the exertion. Finally, with a powerful snip, the strap gave way. The solar panel, still partially attached, suddenly burst open with such force that it sent both astronauts tumbling backwards, a terrifying moment that could have ended in disaster. But they held on, and as the wing unfolded and locked into place, power immediately began flowing into Skylab's starved batteries. The cheers from mission control were deafening. The station had been saved. The crew of Skylab 2 had transformed a potential billion-dollar failure into one of NASA's finest hours, a breathtaking display of human courage and ingenuity under pressure. With their home now safe and functional, the three astronauts could finally begin the program's real work, a then record-breaking 28-day mission dedicated to science. Skylab was equipped as a powerhouse of research. Its Apollo telescope mount, a sophisticated solar observatory, gave astronomers their first long-term, unobstructed view of the Sun, free from the distorting effects of Earth's atmosphere. The crew captured tens of thousands of photographs of solar flares, sunspots, and the corona, revolutionizing our understanding of solar physics and its effects on our planet, known as space weather. Another set of cameras was trained downward, conducting detailed Earth resources experiments. They mapped mineral deposits, monitored crop health, tracked pollution in the oceans and atmosphere, and even discovered previously unknown geological faults, proving the immense practical value of observing our planet from above. Perhaps the most critical research, however, was conducted on the astronauts themselves. For the first time, scientists could meticulously study the effects of prolonged weightlessness on the human body. The crew faced the now well-known but then poorly understood challenges of space adaptation: nausea, fluid shifts that gave them puffy faces and bird-like legs, and the relentless loss of bone density and muscle mass. Skylab was outfitted with a cycling ergometer and a zero-G treadmill, and the crew followed a strict exercise regimen to combat these changes. They also kept detailed logs of their nutrition and participated in medical tests, providing a treasure trove of data on cardiovascular health, balance, and sleep in space. This information was absolutely foundational, proving that with proper countermeasures, humans could live and work in space for months at a time without suffering irreversible harm. The knowledge gained directly enabled the extended stays on Mir and the International Space Station that we see today. Two subsequent crews, Skylab 3 and 4, would build on this success, pushing the duration record to 59 and then 84 days, each mission returning reams of scientific data and further validating the space station concept. When the final crew departed in February of 1974, they left Skylab in a stable orbit, expecting it to remain there for another decade. However, increased solar activity caused Earth's atmosphere to expand farther than predicted, dragging the massive station toward an earlier than planned re-entry. In a dramatic and globally watched event in July of 1979, Skylab plunged through the atmosphere, breaking apart and scattering debris across the remote deserts of Western Australia. While its fiery end was a spectacle, its legacy was one of profound triumph. Skylab proved that astronauts could repair and adapt complex machinery in the harsh environment of space, a lesson that would prove critical decades later for the Hubble Space Telescope repairs. More importantly, it demonstrated that humanity wasn't just visiting space. We were learning how to live there, turning a crisis at launch into a resounding success that laid the essential groundwork for everything that was to follow. After years of staring each other down from across the technological and ideological abyss, the two superpowers did something unprecedented. They reached out a hand. The Apollo-Soyuz test project, launched in the summer of 1975, was far more than a space mission. It was a carefully orchestrated political ballet, a powerful symbol of the era of détente that sought to thaw the icy tensions of the Cold War. For the first time, the fierce competitors of the space race would become partners. their spacecraft designed not for solo glory but for a delicate orbital handshake. This mission would prove that even the most complex technology of national security could be repurposed for peace, setting a vital precedent for the future of exploration. The technical challenges of such a partnership were immense. The American Apollo and Soviet Soyuz spacecraft were products of completely separate engineering philosophies, built with different measurement systems, atmospheric compositions, and docking mechanisms. The Apollo cabin was filled with a pure, low-pressure oxygen environment, while the Soyuz maintained a nitrogen-oxygen mix at a higher pressure, similar to Earth's air at sea level. A direct hatch opening would have been catastrophic. The brilliant solution was a marvel of diplomatic and technical compromise, a specially designed docking module that would act as an airlock and adapter. This cylindrical tunnel, carried atop the Apollo spacecraft, contained systems to equalize pressure and purify the air, allowing the crews to move safely between their two vastly different worlds without suffering from the bends or oxygen toxicity. This module became a tangible bridge not just between two spacecraft but between two competing visions of spaceflight. On July 15, 1975, the world watched as a Soviet Soyuz rocket lifted off from Baikonur Cosmodrome, carrying cosmonauts Alexei Leonov and Valery Kubasov. Just 7.5 hours later, an American Saturn IB rocket launched from Kennedy Space Center, carrying astronauts Tom Stafford, Vance Brand, and Deke Slayton. The choice of crews was deeply symbolic. Stafford was a seasoned Apollo veteran, while Slayton was one of the original Mercury 7, finally getting his chance to fly after being grounded for over a decade due to a heart condition. On the Soviet side, Leonov was a legendary figure, the first human to ever walk in space. These were not junior personnel, they were icons of their respective programs, lending their full prestige to the success of the venture. The docking 2 days later was a tense and precise operation, a slow-motion dance conducted at 17,000 miles per hour. As the two spacecraft closed the final distance, the androgynous docking system, another key innovation designed for this mission, made its first capture. The mechanism was called androgynous because it had no traditional male or female roles. Either side could act as the active or passive partner, a crucial design for future international rescue operations. After a firm mechanical connection was confirmed, the real work began. The crews carefully equalized pressures, and finally, after what must have felt like an eternity, the hatch was opened. Tom Stafford and Alexei Leonov floated into the docking module and met in the middle, shaking hands and exchanging gifts in front of a live television camera. The image of an American astronaut and a Soviet cosmonaut, grinning broadly in their respective flags-adorned flight suits, embracing in the weightlessness of orbit, was beamed across a divided planet. It was a moment of pure, unscripted humanity that transcended politics. For the next 2 days, the 5 men conducted joint experiments, shared meals, and gave television tours of each other's spacecraft. They swapped linguistic jokes. Leonov greeted the Americans with "Tovarichi, let's get to work," while Stafford responded with a heavily accented Poyakali. Gagarin's famous "Let's go." They even played a mock chess game, declaring the Soviets the winners after a friendly dispute over the rules. While the scientific return was modest, the diplomatic and symbolic return was incalculable. The mission demonstrated to a skeptical world that cooperation was not just possible but profoundly practical. It built a foundation of trust between the two space agencies that would persist even as political relations cooled again in the following years. The legacy of the Apollo-Soyuz test project extends far beyond that single handshake. The universal docking system designed for the mission became the direct ancestor of the docking mechanisms used today on the International Space Station, a permanent testament to its successful design. More importantly, it established the crucial playbook for international space cooperation. It proved that technical standards could be agreed upon, that language barriers could be overcome, and that crews could train together despite vast cultural differences. When the Cold War eventually ended, the personal relationships and institutional knowledge forged during Apollo-Soyuz made the audacious idea of a jointly built and operated space station not a fantasy, but a logical next step. It was the moment we collectively decided that the high ground of space did not have to be a battleground, but could instead be common ground. The triumphant orbital reconnaissance of Mariner 9 had completely rewritten the Martian textbook, transforming it from a dead, cratered world into a planet with a complex, Earth-like past. It revealed volcanoes that dwarfed anything on our planet, a canyon system that could span the entire United States, and most tantalizingly, the ghostly outlines of ancient riverbeds and floodplains. This new portrait of a once wet Mars, potentially habitable in its youth, set the stage for the next logical and most profound question: could life have arisen there? And if it did, could any remnant of it still exist? The United States was determined to answer this question directly, not with a flyby or an orbiter, but by going down to the surface and tasting the soil. The ambitious and incredibly complex Viking program was born from this desire, a billion-dollar gamble to perform the first successful soft landing on Mars and to conduct the first ever experimental search for life beyond Earth. The scale of the endeavor was staggering. Viking wasn't a single spacecraft, it was two identical, fully independent robotic laboratories, each consisting of an orbiter and a lander. The orbiters would first map the planet from above, using their high-resolution cameras to scout for safe landing sites, acting as crucial advanced scouts. The landers were technological marvels of the mid-1970s, packed with an array of sophisticated instruments designed to analyze the Martian atmosphere, weather, seismology, and most importantly, its soil. Each lander was a three-legged, nuclear-powered science station equipped with a robotic arm that could stretch out, scoop up a sample of the rusty red soil, and deliver it to a suite of miniaturized laboratories inside its sterile, pressurized body. The entire mission was a breathtaking leap in planetary science, pushing the boundaries of automation, robotics, and remote control to their absolute limits. Viking 1's lander made history first, touching down on the western slope of Kry's Planitia on July 20, 1976, a flawless landing on the 7th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moonwalk. Its twin, Viking 2, followed suit, settling down on the northern plains of Utopia Planitia on September 3rd. The first images they sent back were mesmerizing. For the first time, humanity was looking at the surface of Mars from its own perspective. We saw a rocky, pinkish-red desert under a thin, pale pink sky, a stark and beautiful landscape that was both alien and strangely familiar. The cameras showed dunes, drifts of fine soil, and rocks of all sizes that appeared to be nestled in place by a gentle wind. It was a static, seemingly lifeless vista, but the real excitement was happening inside the landers, where 3 specific biology experiments were beginning their work on the first Martian soil samples. These experiments were masterpieces of scientific creativity, each designed to test for life in a different way. The gas exchange experiment, nicknamed GX, was a cautious approach. It treated a soil sample with a rich, organic nutrient soup, and then looked for gases that life might exhale as waste, such as oxygen, carbon dioxide, or methane. The labeled release experiment, or LR, took a more direct tack. It moistened a soil sample with a nutrient broth where the carbon atoms were tagged with a radioactive marker. The idea was simple. If any microbes were present and they ate the food, they would metabolize it and release the radioactive carbon as a gas, which a detector would then spot. The third experiment, the pyrolytic release experiment, or PR, was the most delicate. It attempted to simulate the Martian surface conditions using carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide gases tagged with radioactive carbon-14. It would then shine an artificial sun on the sample for several days, hoping that any photosynthetic organisms would incorporate the radioactive carbon into their cells. Afterward, the sample would be baked at a high temperature to vaporize any organic material, and a detector would look for the radioactive signature in the resulting gases. The results from these tests were immediate, dramatic, and utterly baffling. The LR experiment, overseen by its principal investigator Gilbert Levin, gave a stunningly positive signal. Almost immediately after the nutrient was added, the instrument detected a significant release of radioactive gas, exactly what you would expect if living organisms were metabolizing the food. The GX experiment also registered a massive, rapid release of oxygen when the soil was humidified, a reaction so vigorous it was unlike anything seen with sterile soils on Earth. For a few exhilarating days, it seemed they had done it. They had found life on Mars, but the celebration was short-lived. The PR experiment found no evidence of organic synthesis. Most damningly, the gas chromatograph mass spectrometer, the lander's ultimate arbiter for the presence of organic molecules, found absolutely nothing. Not a single trace of the complex carbon-based molecules that are the fundamental building blocks of life as we know it. It was a devastating contradiction. The biology experiments were screaming yes, while the chemistry instrument was definitively stating no. This confounding puzzle sparked a scientific debate that has raged for decades and continues to this day. The official NASA conclusion, championed by most of the project's leadership, was that the positive signals were caused by unusual but non-biological chemistry in the Martian soil. They proposed that the intense ultraviolet radiation from the sun, unblocked by a protective ozone layer, had created highly reactive chemicals like peroxides or superoxides in the soil. When the Viking landers added water and nutrients, these oxidants simply broke down the organic compounds in the soup, releasing the gases in a purely chemical reaction that mimicked biology. This explanation neatly accounted for the lack of detected organics and the rapid, vigorous nature of the reactions. Gilbert Levin, however, until his passing, remained steadfast in his belief that the LR experiment had indeed found microbial life, arguing that the official explanation was a contrived way to dismiss a positive result that the scientific community was simply not prepared to accept. The legacy of the Viking missions is immense and complex. On one hand, they were phenomenal technical successes, proving that we could land sophisticated laboratories on another world and operate them for years. They returned over 4,000 breathtaking images and a wealth of data on Martian weather, geology, and composition that shaped our understanding for a generation. But their true, enduring legacy lies in the profound philosophical and strategic lessons they taught us about the search for life itself. They taught us that the universe might be far more clever and bizarre than we imagined, capable of producing complex chemistry that can perfectly mimic the signals of biology. They forced a fundamental shift in strategy. The search for life could no longer be a direct Viking-style experiment looking for metabolism. It had to become a more nuanced step-by-step process. Future missions like the rover's Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance would first work to understand the planet's environmental history, to follow the water, then look for habitability, and finally to search for the organic biosignatures that Viking had so famously failed to find. Viking's ambiguous results were not a failure. They were a masterclass in scientific humility, a decades-long puzzle that continues to drive and refine our quest to answer one of humanity's oldest questions: are we alone in the universe? While the Viking landers were digging into the rusty soil of Mars, an even more ambitious pair of explorers were being prepared for a journey of literally cosmic proportions. The Voyager program was born from a rare and fleeting celestial alignment, a geometric quirk that occurs only once every 176 years. The outer planets Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune were falling into a position that would allow a single spacecraft to use the gravity of one to slingshot itself onto the next, a celestial pinball game that could cut the travel time to Neptune from 30 years down to 12. NASA initially envisioned a grand mission to visit all four giants, but budget cuts scaled it back. The agency's ingenuity, however, found a way. They approved two spacecraft, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, with Voyager 2's trajectory carefully planned to still achieve the Grand Tour if its sister spacecraft succeeded in its primary goals first. These twin robotic ambassadors, launched just weeks apart in the summer of 1977, were not just probes, they were the most sophisticated planetary observers ever built, equipped with a suite of instruments that would turn the points of light in our telescopes into vibrant, dynamic worlds. The discoveries began almost as soon as they reached the Jovian system in 1979, and they were nothing short of revolutionary. Jupiter was not simply a giant striped gas ball, it was a complex, turbulent, and stormy mini-solar system. Voyager 1's cameras revealed that the Great Red Spot, a feature observed for centuries, was a colossal anti-cyclonic storm larger than Earth, rotating in a sea of swirling cloud bands. But the true showstopper was its revelation of Jupiter's moons. They were not the dead, cratered worlds most expected. Io, the innermost of the four Galilean moons, was a visual shock. It was a world painted in garish yellows, oranges, and reds, utterly devoid of impact craters. Voyager's imaging scientist, Linda Morabito, was examining a photo when she noticed a strange, umbrella-shaped feature extending beyond the moon's limb. It was the plume of an active volcano, erupting material hundreds of miles into space. Io was the most volcanically active body in the entire solar system, its interior kneaded and heated by the immense gravitational tug-of-war between Jupiter and its sister moon. Europa, another moon, presented a different mystery. Its surface was a cracked and fractured shell of smooth water ice, crisscrossed with dark streaks, suggesting a vast, global liquid water ocean lurking just beneath the frozen crust, a place that instantly became a prime target in the search for extraterrestrial life. The journey to Saturn provided another cascade of wonders. Voyager 1's primary mission was to get a close look at the moon Titan, known to have a thick, hazy atmosphere. Its flyby confirmed Titan was an incredibly exotic world, with a nitrogen-rich atmosphere and hydrocarbon lakes, a freezing analog to the early Earth. This focus, however, meant its path would take it out of the plane of the solar system, ending its planetary tour. The baton was passed to Voyager 2 to continue the grand tour to Uranus and Neptune. At Saturn, the probes turned their instruments on the magnificent ring system, revealing it to be not a few solid bands, but thousands upon thousands of intricate ringlets, braided, kinked, and shepherded by the gravitational influence of tiny moonlets embedded within them. The rings were a dynamic, evolving structure, not a static relic. Voyager 2's solo journey to the ice giants was a testament to human perseverance and engineering. By the time it reached Uranus in 1986, it was so far from the Sun that its cameras had to be reprogrammed with longer exposure times to capture enough light in the profound gloom. The data returned was worth the wait. Uranus itself was a featureless, serene blue-green orb, but its moons were a treasury of bizarre geology. Miranda, a small moon, looked as if it had been shattered and haphazardly reassembled, with cliff faces miles high and strange, chevron-shaped patterns. Next came Neptune in 1989, the final port of call. Here, Voyager 2 found a world of surprising dynamism, with the fastest winds in the solar system raging in its atmosphere and a giant, dark storm spot akin to Jupiter's. Its large moon Triton was revealed to be a frozen wonderland with active geysers erupting nitrogen gas and dark dust particles into its thin atmosphere, a stunningly active world at the very edge of the Sun's influence. But the mission of Voyager did not end with Neptune's farewell. Having completed their epic tour of the planets, both spacecraft continued on their trajectories, speeding outward into the void at over 35,000 miles per hour. Their new mission, the Voyager Interstellar mission, had begun. For decades, they have continued to send back data on the far reaches of the Sun's influence, eventually crossing the heliopause, the boundary where the Sun's solar wind gives way to the interstellar medium. Voyager 1 entered this entirely new realm in 2012, followed by Voyager 2 in 2018, making them the first human-made objects to truly enter interstellar space. They now measure the magnetic fields and cosmic rays of the galaxy itself, acting as our most distant outposts. Perhaps the most profound aspect of their journey is the message they carry. Mounted on each spacecraft is a 12-inch gold-plated copper disk, a literal time capsule for any intelligent civilization that might one day find them. Conceived by a committee led by Carl Sagan, the Golden Record contains sounds and images selected to portray the diversity of life and culture on Earth. It has greetings in 55 languages, the brainwaves of a person in love, music from around the world ranging from Bach to Chuck Berry, and the sounds of whales, thunder, and a mother's kiss. It includes diagrams showing our location relative to pulsars and instructions on how to play the record. The Voyagers are more than just probes. They are bottles cast into the cosmic ocean, carrying the essence of our world on a journey that will last for billions of years, long after our sun has died, a permanent testament to a curious species on a pale blue dot who once looked up at the stars and decided to send a piece of themselves out into the great unknown. For decades, spaceflight had followed a single, dramatic script: a controlled explosion off the launch pad, a brief, brilliant mission, and a fiery, one-time only return. It was an endeavor of immense expense and disposability, where the most complex machinery ever built was used once and then discarded to the ocean depths. The dream, however, had always been to create something that could travel to space and back again, landing like an airplane, ready to be refueled, refurbished, and reflown. This vision of a reusable spaceship was the driving force behind what would become the most complex machine ever built, the Space Shuttle. And on April 12, 1981, that vision became a breathtaking and incredibly risky reality with the first flight of the Space Shuttle Columbia. The date was steeped in symbolism. It was exactly 20 years to the day after Yuri Gagarin became the first human in space. But unlike Gagarin's fully automated flight, this was to be a test flight in the truest sense of the word. Strapped inside the orbiter Columbia were two veteran test pilots, Commander John Young and pilot Robert Crippen. Young was a spaceflight legend, a veteran of both Gemini and Apollo who had already walked on the moon. Crippen was a talented rookie, finally getting his first flight after over a decade in the astronaut corps. They were not riding a simple capsule. They were perched atop a controlled explosion, strapped to a massive external fuel tank and two solid rocket boosters, a configuration that had never been flown with humans aboard. In fact, the shuttle had never been flown at all. Every single previous American manned mission had been preceded by at least one unmanned test flight. For the shuttle, there would be no such safety net. The first time its engines would ever light, the first time its aerodynamic design would be tested in real re-entry, the first time its thermal tiles would face the inferno of plasma, all of it would be with two astronauts on board. The tension at Kennedy Space Center that morning was unlike any before it. As the countdown reached zero, the solid rocket boosters ignited with an earth-shaking roar, and Columbia leaped from the pad. For the first 2 minutes, the ride was violent and incredibly loud, shaking the spacecraft far more than the astronauts had anticipated. Then, the boosters spent, they were jettisoned to parachute into the Atlantic for recovery. The main engines continued to burn, pushing Young and Crippen toward orbit. After 8.5 minutes, the main engines cut off. The external fuel tank was jettisoned to burn up in the atmosphere, and a profound silence fell over the cabin. They had made it. They were in orbit. For the next 2 days, the two men put the spacecraft through its paces, testing its systems, opening and closing the massive payload bay doors that were critical for radiating the vehicle's heat, and preparing for the ultimate test, the return to Earth. The most terrifying and revolutionary part of the mission was still to come, the descent. Unlike any spacecraft before it, the shuttle was a flying brick. It had no engines for landing. It was a glider, and a notoriously poor one at that. It would hit the upper atmosphere at over 17,000 miles per hour, using its blunt underside to aerobrake, creating a plasma sheath that would cut off all communication for 16 agonizing minutes. During this blackout period, no one on the ground knew if the ship was intact or if the critical heat shield, composed of over 30,000 individually glued on silica tiles, was holding. If a single tile was missing or damaged, superheated plasma could seep into the airframe and destroy the vehicle. As Columbia emerged from the blackout, a chase plane piloted by astronauts sighted it, looking pristine and steady. Young took manual control, executing a series of steep, sweeping, S-turn maneuvers to bleed off excess energy before lining up with the runway at Edwards Air Force Base. The landing was perfect. The spacecraft that had left Earth as a rocket had returned as a plane, touching down on the dry lakebed to the cheers of the recovery team. As the wheels stopped, John Young, ever the stoic test pilot, simply said, "We have a new world now." The success of STS-1 was a monumental engineering triumph. It promised a new paradigm of frequent, affordable, and routine access to space. The shuttle was a versatile truck designed to deploy and repair satellites, conduct cutting-edge science in its pressurized Spacelab module, and even act as a construction vehicle for a future space station. It made spaceflight appear almost commonplace to the public, with its reusable nature and crews that included not just pilots, but scientists, engineers, and even politicians. For the next 30 years, the shuttle fleet would define American spaceflight, enabling some of the most iconic achievements in orbit, from the deployment and repair of the Hubble Space Telescope to the construction of the International Space Station. It carried the first American woman and the first African-American astronauts into space, democratizing access to orbit in a way that had never been done before. Yet the program's legacy is a complex and ultimately tragic one. The very reusability that was its selling point proved to be its greatest challenge and expense. The turnaround between flights was never the quick, airplane-like operation envisioned. It was a lengthy and exhaustive process of rebuilding and replacing complex components. The cost of maintaining the fleet remained staggeringly high, never achieving the affordability that was promised, and the inherent risks of the design, with its side-mounted orbiter and lack of an escape system, were tragically realized with the losses of Challenger in 1986 and Columbia in 2003. These disasters, caused by failures in the very reusable systems the shuttle championed, exposed the fragile line between routine operation and catastrophic failure. Despite its flaws and tragedies, the first flight of Columbia irrevocably changed the paradigm of space access. It proved that a reusable spacecraft was possible, a concept that has directly inspired the next generation of public and private vehicles. It transformed our vision of what an astronaut could be, expanding the role from pilot to payload specialist, from passenger to constructor. It showed us that space could be a workplace, a laboratory, and a building site. The shuttle era taught us difficult but invaluable lessons about the true challenges of operating a reusable vehicle in the harsh environment of space. While it never achieved the dream of cheap and easy travel, it successfully built the foundation for the future, demonstrating the incredible things we can accomplish when we dare to build a ship that can not only leave our world but can also come home. Yet for all the shuttle's promise of routine access to space, its most profound mission would be one of pure, unadulterated observation. The dream was to lift a telescope above the blurring and filtering effects of Earth's atmosphere, to peer into the cosmos with crystal clarity. That dream took shape as the Hubble Space Telescope, a complex orbiting observatory designed to see further and sharper than any instrument before it. After years of delays and technical hurdles, the Space Shuttle Discovery finally carried Hubble to orbit in April of 1990. Its deployment a moment of immense pride for NASA and the global scientific community. The world awaited the first images, expecting a revolutionary new view of the universe. What arrived instead was a devastating blow. The first pictures were blurry, hopelessly out of focus. A catastrophic flaw had been discovered. The telescope's primary mirror, the very heart of the instrument, had been ground to the wrong shape. It was off by a mere 1/50th the width of a human hair, a microscopic error with astronomical consequences. Hubble, hailed as the next great eye on the cosmos, was myopic, a $2.5 billion instrument that could not see. The ensuing investigation was a brutal exercise in soul-searching. The error was traced back to a null corrector, a device used to precisely guide the mirror's polishing. A tiny fleck of paint on a measuring rod had thrown off its calibration, and that error had gone unnoticed through a series of quality control failures. The telescope became a late-night talk show punchline and a symbol of government incompetence in the press. But within the despair lay a crucial saving grace. Hubble was designed for the shuttle era. It was built with modular components and numerous handholds intended to be serviced and upgraded by astronauts. The flaw was a disaster, but it was not necessarily a permanent one. NASA immediately began planning one of the most audacious and complex repair missions in history. They would train a crew of astronauts to become orbital optometrists, performing a series of intricate spacewalks to install corrective lenses and essentially give the telescope a pair of glasses. In December of 1993, the Space Shuttle Endeavour launched on a mission that held the entire future of space-based astronomy in the balance. The world watched, gripped by a drama of high-stakes orbital surgery. Over 5 days, 2 teams of astronauts conducted a series of exhausting and perilous spacewalks. They replaced Hubble's faulty solar panels, installed new gyroscopes, and most critically, they swapped out the high-speed photometer instrument with a new device called COSTAR, the Corrective Optics Space Telescope Axial Replacement. COSTAR was a marvel of engineering, a telephone booth-sized unit containing a set of 12 precisely ground mirrors that would intercept the light from the flawed primary mirror, correct its distortion, and redirect the perfectly focused beams to the other scientific instruments. In a simultaneous operation, they also replaced the original wide-field and planetary camera with a new model, WFPC-2, which had its own internal corrective optics built directly into its design. The repairs were a breathtaking success. The first test images transmitted back to Earth were sharp, stunning, and flawless. The fix was perfect. Hubble could finally see. What followed was nothing less than a complete revolution in our understanding of the cosmos. With its vision restored, Hubble began to deliver on every one of its promises and then some. It peered into the hearts of nebulas where stars are born, resolving details never before seen. It studied the weather on other planets in our solar system, tracked the impact of a comet into Jupiter, and provided conclusive evidence for the existence of supermassive black holes at the centers of galaxies. But 2 observations stand above all others for their profound impact. The first was the Hubble Deep Field. In 1995, astronomers pointed the telescope at a seemingly empty patch of sky near the Big Dipper, a region so dark it was equivalent to holding a grain of sand at arm's length. Over 10 consecutive days, Hubble gathered the faintest light, performing the longest exposure ever attempted. The resulting image was humbling and paradigm-shifting. That tiny, empty piece of sky contained not a few dozen, but over 3,000 galaxies, each a sprawling island of billions of stars. The image provided a core sample of the universe, revealing its mind-boggling scale and the sheer abundance of galaxies, fundamentally changing our perception of our place within it. The second monumental contribution was in refining the age of the universe itself. For decades, astronomers had argued over the value of the Hubble constant, the rate of the universe's expansion. Depending on the method used, estimates varied wildly, suggesting the universe could be as young as 8 billion or as old as 20 billion years. This was a problem, as some of the oldest stars in our own galaxy were estimated to be older than the universe itself, a clear impossibility. Hubble's sharp vision allowed astronomers to observe a specific type of pulsating star, called a Cepheid variable, in galaxies much farther away than ever before. By meticulously measuring the distance to these galaxies and the speed at which they were receding, the teams were able to calculate the Hubble constant with unprecedented precision. The results settled the debate. The universe is approximately 13.8 billion years old, finally providing a consistent and reliable cosmic timeline. Hubble's legacy extended even further, playing a pivotal role in one of the most shocking discoveries of the 20th century, the acceleration of the universe's expansion. By observing distant supernovae, Hubble helped astronomers determine that not only is the universe expanding, but the rate of that expansion is increasing over time, driven by a mysterious, repulsive force dubbed dark energy. This discovery, which earned the Nobel Prize in Physics in 2011, completely upended our understanding of cosmic evolution and revealed that the vast majority of the universe is made of substances, dark matter and dark energy, that we cannot see and do not understand. From its initial humiliation to its ultimate triumph, the Hubble Space Telescope transformed from a symbol of failure into arguably the most important scientific instrument ever built. It didn't just show us the universe, it gave us a new universe to study, one of breathtaking depth, bewildering mystery, and unimaginable beauty, forever changing our relationship with the cosmos. The fall of the Soviet Union was an earthquake that shook the entire world, and its violent tremors reached all the way into orbit. For decades, the Soviet space program had been a towering symbol of national prestige and technological might, an arm of the state that answered directly to the Politburo and the military. Its funding was virtually limitless, its goals were a matter of national priority, and its successes were a cornerstone of communist propaganda. But as the USSR began to fracture in the late 1980s, this once mighty institution found itself caught in a perfect storm of political chaos and economic collapse. The very government that had created and funded it was evaporating, and the new Russian Federation that emerged from the rubble in December of 1991 was bankrupt, disorganized, and struggling to feed its own people. The space program, once a source of immense pride, was now a luxury that seemed impossible to afford. At the heart of this crisis was Mir, the crown jewel of the Soviet space program. Launched in 1986, Mir, which means peace or world, was a masterpiece of modular design. It was the world's first permanently inhabited space station, a complex of multiple laboratories and living quarters that had been assembled piece by piece in orbit. It represented the pinnacle of Soviet engineering and a bold vision for long-term human habitation in space. Cosmonauts had set endurance records on board, conducting vital research on the effects of weightlessness and proving that humans could live and work in space for over a year at a time. But by 1991, this orbiting triumph was in mortal danger. The funding from Moscow had dried up almost completely. The factories that built its resupply rockets were struggling to pay workers and source materials. The entire infrastructure that supported Mir was on the verge of shutting down. The station itself was beginning to show its age, suffering from constant system failures and power outages. The unthinkable was becoming a real possibility, the abandonment and uncontrolled deorbit of a 100-ton symbol of national achievement. For the cosmonauts on board, the situation was surreal and deeply stressful. They were cut off from the political turmoil on the ground, but they felt its effects directly. Communication with mission control became strained and irregular. They worried about their families back home amid the economic chaos and whether their paychecks would ever arrive. Most urgently, they faced the terrifying prospect that a promised resupply ship might never launch, leaving them stranded without food, water, or the fuel needed to maintain the station's orbit. They were caretakers of a dying outpost, unsure if anyone down below remembered they were still up there. Mir's survival hinged on a desperate and unprecedented act of improvisation. The Russian Space Agency, now separated from its Soviet past, had to become entrepreneurial. They began selling memorabilia and seats on future Soyuz flights to paying passengers from other countries. They partnered with Western companies for commercial research. It was a humbling but necessary shift from a state-funded endeavor to a scrappy, commercial operation fighting for its life. This desperate struggle for survival created a bizarre and historic opportunity. The United States, which had watched the Soviet collapse with a mix of triumph and concern, now faced a new problem. A bankrupt Russia possessed thousands of nuclear warheads and a brain trust of brilliant but suddenly unemployed rocket scientists. There was a very real fear that this expertise and these dangerous materials could be sold to the highest bidder, including hostile nations. Engaging the Russian space program was seen as a strategic move to provide a peaceful, constructive outlet for this talent and to keep them working on projects that benefited the global community, not global instability. From this pragmatic beginning emerged one of the most unexpected partnerships of the post-Cold War era, the Shuttle-Mir program. In 1993, Vice President Al Gore and Russian Prime Minister Viktor Chernomyrdin signed an agreement that would see American astronauts fly to the Russian space station on Russian Soyuz rockets, and later, the space shuttle would dock directly with Mir. The program, dubbed Phase 1 of the International Space Station Cooperation, was far more than a symbolic handshake. It was a deeply practical and often difficult learning experience for both sides. American astronauts had to learn Russian and train at the Gagarin Cosmonaut Training Center in Star City, immersing themselves in a completely different engineering culture and spacecraft design philosophy. For the Russians, allowing former rivals full access to their prized station was an act of immense trust. When the Space Shuttle Atlantis first docked with Mir in 1995, it was a moment of powerful symbolism. The shuttle, representing American technological prowess, was physically connected to Mir, the stalwart survivor of the Soviet era. The image of the two spacecraft joined together, orbiting over a planet that was no longer divided into two armed camps, was a visual representation of a new world order. The collaboration was not without its severe challenges. Mir was an aging station, and its systems were failing with increasing frequency. During the program, the station faced a frightening fire that filled the modules with smoke, a near collision with a resupply ship that punctured a module, and repeated power failures that left the crews in darkness. American astronauts like Norm Thagard and Shannon Lucid lived through these harrowing events, their extended stays becoming intense tests of diplomacy and endurance as much as science. Yet, these very difficulties proved to be the program's greatest value. The Shuttle-Mir program served as an essential dress rehearsal for the International Space Station. It forced American and Russian engineers to learn to work together, to overcome language barriers, and to develop common technical standards and docking systems. It taught both space agencies how to manage the immense logistical and human challenges of a long-term, integrated partnership. The lessons learned in keeping the aging Mir alive and managing its crises were directly applied to the design and operation of the ISS, making it a safer and more robust outpost. The collapse of a superpower had inadvertently forged a new model of international cooperation, turning a symbol of rivalry into the foundational partnership for humanity's future in space. For centuries, the solar system was viewed as a largely static clockwork, its planets and moons following predictable, peaceful orbits. The idea of colossal, world-altering collisions was something relegated to the distant past, to the formation of the planets billions of years ago. But in July of 1994, that serene view was shattered in the most spectacular fashion imaginable. the solar system revealed itself to be a dynamic and at times violently active shooting gallery, and humanity had a front-row seat to the show. The event was the collision of comet Shoemaker-Levy 9 with the planet Jupiter, a celestial catastrophe that was not just witnessed but accurately predicted, marking a profound turning point in our understanding of our own neighborhood and the very real dangers that lurk within it. The story of this comet begins more than a year earlier, in March of 1993, at the Palomar Observatory in California. Veteran comet hunters Carolyn and Eugene Shoemaker, along with their colleague David Levy, were meticulously photographing the night sky, searching for near-Earth objects. On their photographic plates, they found something bizarre. Instead of a single, fuzzy comet, they saw a strange, squashed string of pearls, a chain of 21 distinct fragments all moving together. Further observations confirmed the incredible truth. This comet had made a perilously close pass by Jupiter in July of 1992. The gas giant's immense gravitational tide had not just captured the comet, it had literally ripped it apart, shredding its icy nucleus into those 21 distinct pieces. Now, like a string of cosmic bullets, these fragments were circling back for a return visit, and their trajectory made it chillingly clear. They were on a direct collision course with Jupiter itself. For the first time in history, astronomers knew a major impact was going to happen, and they knew exactly when and where. The news sent a wave of excitement and urgency through the global astronomical community. Every major telescope on Earth, and more importantly, the recently repaired Hubble Space Telescope in orbit, was trained on Jupiter for the week of July 16th through July 22nd, 1994. The impacts were going to occur on the far side of Jupiter, out of direct view from Earth, but the planet rotates quickly and the impact sites would swing into view within minutes. The world watched and waited. Then the first fragment, designated Fragment A, struck. While hidden from view, NASA Galileo spacecraft, still years away from its own orbital insertion at Jupiter, had a direct line of sight and detected a brilliant fireball soaring above the Jovian limb. As the impact zones rotated into Earth's view, the Hubble telescope and other observatories saw something no human had ever seen before: enormous dark scars blossoming in Jupiter's southern hemisphere. Each successive impact, some larger than Fragment A, created its own massive, expanding bruise of dark debris that stood out starkly against Jupiter's pale cloud bands. The largest of these, from Fragment G, created a dark spot larger than the entire Earth. The energy released was staggering. The Fragment G impact unleashed an explosion estimated to be equivalent to 6 million megatons of TNT, hundreds of times more powerful than the entire world's nuclear arsenal. The scientific payoff was immediate and immense. By analyzing the plume dynamics and the composition of the ejected material, astronomers gained a treasure trove of data. The plumes rose over 1,000 miles above the cloud tops, and spectroscopy revealed the presence of molecules like ammonia, hydrogen sulfide, and sulfur. This confirmed that the comet fragments were dredging up material from deep within Jupiter's atmosphere that was normally hidden from view. The event provided a perfect natural laboratory for studying the physics of hypervelocity impacts, offering clues about the role such collisions played in the early solar system, from the delivery of water to planets to the mass extinction events that have shaped life on Earth. It was a stunning demonstration of planetary science in action, a controlled experiment on a galactic scale. But beyond the pure science, the event delivered a profoundly sobering message to everyone on Earth. For decades, a small group of scientists had been trying to raise the alarm about the threat posed by near-Earth objects, asteroids, and comets whose orbits could intersect with our own. They were often dismissed as alarmists. The spectacle of Shoemaker-Levy 9 changed that conversation overnight. If Jupiter, a target with a massive gravitational well that draws in comets, could be struck so violently, then Earth was certainly not immune. The dark spots on Jupiter were a visceral, undeniable demonstration of what a large impact looks like. It was no longer an abstract concept discussed in scientific papers. It was a real and present danger captured in breathtaking detail for all to see. This single event provided the crucial momentum needed to accelerate and fund programs like NAS, a Near-Earth Object Observations Program, which now diligently catalogues and tracks thousands of potentially hazardous asteroids, tasked with giving us an early warning should another string of cosmic pearls ever be found heading our way. The solar system, we learned, is not a peaceful place, and our survival within it depends on our willingness to watch the skies. After the audacious global partnerships forged in the wake of the Soviet collapse, the focus of planetary exploration turned back to a world that had long captivated us, but had also become synonymous with costly, high-risk failure. The haunting, ambiguous results from the Viking landers 2 decades prior had cast a long shadow, and Mars had proven itself a graveyard for ambitious missions. The Soviet Union had suffered numerous losses, and NASA's own Mars Observer spacecraft had mysteriously failed just before orbital insertion in 1993. A new, leaner, and more resilient approach was needed, one that prioritized simplicity, affordability, and a willingness to accept greater risk for a greater potential reward. The answer was the Discovery program, built on the philosophy of faster, better, cheaper. And its first Martian emissary was not a billion-dollar laboratory, but a daring little lander called Pathfinder, with a passenger that would change everything, the Sojourner rover. The mission architecture was brilliantly unorthodox and harkened back to a simpler time. Instead of using propulsive engines for a controlled, soft landing, Pathfinder would be the first spacecraft to use an airbag landing system. After a fiery, direct entry into the thin Martian atmosphere, a giant parachute would deploy to slow the descent. Then, in the final seconds before impact, enormous airbags would inflate to cocoon the lander. The entire package would free fall the last 100 meters or so, bouncing and rolling across the Martian landscape like a giant beach ball before coming to a stop. It was a method considered far too risky for the delicate Viking landers, but for this new, cost-conscious era, it was a gamble worth taking. The airbags would then deflate and retract, and the lander's 3 metallic petals would open, righting the vehicle and revealing its precious cargo to the alien sun. On July 4, 1997, the world watched this audacious plan unfold in real time. The tension at NAS, a jet propulsion laboratory, was immense as the signals indicated each step of the descent: atmospheric entry, parachute deployment, and then the critical moment of airbag inflation. For several minutes after the expected touchdown, there was only silence. Then, a faint but unmistakable signal was detected by an Earth-based radio telescope. Pathfinder had survived its bounce. The first image it sent back was a low-resolution, black and white fisheye view of its own surroundings, showing a rock-strewn plain that was immediately named the Carl Sagan Memorial Station. The landing was a spectacular, against-the-odds success, a much-needed triumph that reinvigorated Mars exploration. But the true star of the mission was still tucked away on one of the lander's petals. Sojourner was a tiny thing, no larger than a microwave oven and weighing just 25 pounds. Its 6 small wheels and minimalist design made it look more like a sophisticated child's toy than an interplanetary robot. Yet, this diminutive explorer was packed with purpose. After a day of imaging the area, the command was sent for Sojourner to roll down a deployment ramp onto the red soil, becoming the first wheeled vehicle to operate on another planet. Its movement was painstakingly slow, driven by commands from Earth that took over 10 minutes to arrive. Operators had to plan its routes based on the lander's images, navigating around rocks and hazards with extreme caution. Every inch of progress was a monumental achievement. Sojourner's primary mission was intended to last 7 sols or Martian days. It ultimately operated for 83, outliving its own design specifications many times over. During that time, it became a global sensation. The mission's website, a relatively new phenomenon at the time, became a cultural touchstone, shattering internet traffic records as millions of people worldwide logged on daily to see the latest images from the surface of Mars. They watched as the little rover, named after the 19th century abolitionist and women's rights activist Sojourner Truth, used its alpha-proton X-ray spectrometer to analyze the chemistry of rocks that were themselves given playful names like Barnacle Bill, Yogi, and Scooby-Doo. For the first time, the public wasn't just observing a static lander. They were following a mobile explorer on another world, sharing in its daily discoveries and its struggle for survival against the cold Martian nights. The scientific return was impressive, but the engineering and cultural impact was truly revolutionary. Pathfinder and Sojourner proved that mobility was the key to unlocking the secrets of Mars. A stationary lander can only study what is immediately within its reach, but a rover can choose its targets, investigate geological context, and follow the evidence. Sojourner's analysis of the rocks in its vicinity provided crucial ground truth data that helped scientists interpret orbital observations, confirming that the landing site in Earthrise Valleys was indeed an ancient floodplain, as suspected, scattered with a variety of rock types carried from distant highlands. This proved the site was a geological treasure trove, validating the landing strategy. More than anything, the mission's overwhelming public engagement demonstrated that space exploration could still capture the world's heart, creating a sense of wonder and shared adventure that paved the way for public support of the much larger and more ambitious rovers that would follow: Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance. Pathfinder didn't just land on Mars, it landed a new, more adventurous and publicly accessible era of exploration. After the triumphs and tragedies of individual space programs, a new and more unified vision for humanity's future beyond Earth was finally taking physical form. For years, it existed only as complex blueprints, high-level diplomatic agreements, and the shared ambition of 15 nations. But on November 20th, 1998, a powerful Proton rocket roared to life from the Baikonur Cosmodrome in Kazakhstan, carrying a payload that would become the cornerstone of the most ambitious engineering project ever attempted, the first module of the International Space Station. This module, named Zarya, which means sunrise, was a fitting title for the dawn of a new era in space exploration, one built not on competition but on unprecedented global cooperation. Zarya, also known as the Functional Cargo Block, was a marvel of Russian engineering and a testament to the pragmatic reuse of proven technology. Its design was heavily based on the modules that had served the Mir space station so well, functioning as a crucial tugboat and power source for the nascent station. Funded by the United States but built by the Russian aerospace company Khrunichev, Zarya represented the deeply intertwined nature of the partnership from the very beginning. Its roles were vital and multifaceted. It contained the primary propulsion and navigation systems to keep the station stable in its orbit, and its large solar arrays would unfurl to provide the initial electrical power needed for the next critical step. For 16 days, Zarya circled the planet alone, a silent and dormant seed waiting for the arrival of its partner. That partner was the Unity Connecting Module, also known as Node 1. Built by Boeing in the United States, Unity was a fundamentally different kind of spacecraft. Where Zarya was a functional workhorse, Unity was a complex hub, a pressurized passageway with 6 berthing ports designed to be the literal and figurative connection point for future laboratory modules from the United States, Europe, and Japan. Its launch on December 4, 1998, aboard the Space Shuttle Endeavour on mission STS-88, was a showcase of American spaceflight capabilities. The shuttle's crew, commanded by veteran astronaut Bob Cabana, had one of the most intricate and critical tasks in the history of the program: to capture the free-flying Zarya and physically join it with Unity, creating the first permanent link in the orbital complex. The rendezvous and capture were executed with breathtaking precision. Using the shuttle's robotic arm, astronaut Nancy Curry gently grasped the waiting Zarya module, carefully aligning it with the Unity node that sat in the shuttle's payload bay. Then, in a series of painstaking spacewalks, astronauts Jerry Ross and Jim Newman ventured outside to manually connect the maze of power and data cables between the two modules. This was far more than a simple mechanical docking. It was a delicate electrical and computational marriage, ensuring the two halves, built a world apart by different cultures and engineering philosophies, could communicate and function as a single, integrated spacecraft. When the final connections were made and the hatches were opened, the two modules became one station. The first human outpost conceived and built by the entire world was officially open for business. The significance of this moment cannot be overstated. The connection of Zarya and Unity was more than a technical milestone. It was the physical realization of a dream that had seemed impossible just a decade earlier. It represented a profound commitment from the 15 partner nations, the United States, Russia, Canada, Japan, and 11 member states of the European Space Agency, to set aside terrestrial differences and work toward a common goal of scientific and exploratory progress. The scale of the logistics was staggering, involving coordination across dozens of time zones, language barriers, and different measurement systems. Every bolt, every wire, every software line had to be designed to interface perfectly, a global puzzle assembled in the most unforgiving environment imaginable. This partnership ensured the station's survival through political upheavals and budget cycles, as it became a project so large and so interwoven that no single nation could afford to abandon it. The launch of those first modules signaled to the world that we had collectively decided our future in space would be written together, a permanent sunrise for human presence in the cosmos. Yet, even as the station grew into a symbol of global unity in orbit, a stark and devastating reminder was brewing of the immense risks that still accompany every journey beyond our atmosphere. The Space Shuttle program, which had enabled so much of this progress, had long operated under a dangerous assumption that its iconic thermal protection system was robust enough to withstand the inevitable impacts of foam and ice shed from the external fuel tank during launch. This belief was tragically and fatally proven wrong on the morning of February 1, 2003. Space Shuttle Columbia, the fleet's flagship and the first to fly into space, was concluding a highly successful 16-day scientific mission. As it began its fiery re-entry over the Pacific Ocean, traveling at 18 times the speed of sound, the 7 astronauts aboard were unaware that a catastrophic breach had already sealed their fate. A piece of insulating foam, no larger than a briefcase, had broken off from the external tank 82 seconds after launch and had struck the leading edge of Columbia's left wing at over 500 miles per hour. This event was not entirely unknown to engineers on the ground. Footage of the strike was analyzed during the flight, but its severity was profoundly underestimated. Management had grown accustomed to such foam-shedding events, dismissing them as maintenance issues rather than mortal threats to the vehicle and crew. This normalization of deviance, the gradual acceptance of flaws as routine, created a cultural blind spot with disastrous consequences. The physics of re-entry are unforgiving. As Columbia plunged into the upper atmosphere, superheated plasma, reaching temperatures of nearly 3,000 degrees Fahrenheit, began to seep through the breach in the reinforced carbon-carbon panel on the wing's leading edge. Inside Mission Control, the first signs of trouble were subtle but chilling. Temperature sensors on the left wing began to fail one by one, their readings dropping off into meaningless noise. Then hydraulic sensors in the left landing gear wheel well showed strains beyond their design limits. The final communication from Commander Rick Husband was a calm, truncated response to a call from Mission Control, cut off mid-sentence. To those on the ground in Texas, the end was announced not by a radio signal, but by a series of sonic booms that abruptly ceased, followed by the horrorizing sight of the shuttle breaking apart into multiple streaks of light and debris across the morning sky. The loss of signal was immediate and absolute. In an instant, the lives of 7 explorers, Rick Husband, William McCool, Michael Anderson, David Brown, Kalpana Chawla, Laurel Clark, and Ilan Ramon, Israel's first astronaut, were lost, and the shuttle program was plunged into its second deep crisis. The subsequent investigation, led by the independent Columbia Accident Investigation Board, was a painstaking and brutally honest examination of both the technical and cultural causes of the disaster. The physical cause was clear. The foam strike had punched a hole in the wing, allowing the searing plasma to enter and destroy the shuttle's internal structure during re-entry. But the board's report went much further, identifying the root cause not as a simple mechanical failure, but as a profound breakdown in NASA's safety culture. The agency had become a victim of its own success. The relentless pressure to maintain a demanding launch schedule for the International Space Station construction, combined with budget constraints, had created an environment where engineers' concerns were too easily overruled by managers who had become desensitized to the inherent risks of foam shedding. The board condemned a culture that relied on past success as a substitute for sound engineering analysis, a process where the absence of a past catastrophe was mistakenly taken as evidence that a catastrophe was impossible. It was a failure of leadership, communication, and vigilance that echoed the lessons of the Challenger disaster 17 years earlier, lessons that had clearly not been fully learned or institutionalized. The impact of the Columbia tragedy resonated far beyond the space agency. It was a national trauma that forced a fundamental re-evaluation of America's entire human spaceflight strategy. The shuttle fleet was immediately grounded for over 2 years as NASA implemented the investigation board's recommendations, developing intricate new in-flight inspection and repair techniques and redesigning the external tank to minimize foam shedding. But the damage to the shuttle's reputation was permanent. The vehicle was now undeniably recognized as inherently fragile. AND Chinese letter. The Columbia accident, coupled with the loss of Challenger, cemented the political decision to retire the entire shuttle fleet once the International Space Station was completed. This decision created a significant gap in American access to space, forcing the U.S. to rely on Russian Soyuz spacecraft to transport astronauts to the ISS for nearly a decade, a situation with complex geopolitical implications. Yet from this profound tragedy emerged a renewed and unwavering commitment to crew safety that would reshape the future of spaceflight. The mantra, "failure is not an option," was replaced by a more pragmatic and rigorous principle: to always question, to always listen to dissenting engineering opinions, and to never again normalize a known danger. This new safety-first ethos became the foundational DNA for NASA, a next generation of spacecraft, the Constellation program, and later the Commercial Crew program. It demanded designs with full launch escape systems, something the shuttle notoriously lacked, and a far greater margin for error. The lessons of Columbia directly influenced the development of Orion and the commercial vehicles from SpaceX and Boeing, which prioritize astronaut survivability through every phase of flight. The loss of Columbia and her crew was a heartbreaking price to pay, but it served as a brutal, necessary catalyst for change. It shattered complacency, forced a return to first principles of engineering excellence, and ultimately ensured that the next chapter of human spaceflight would be built on a far safer and more sustainable foundation, a legacy those 7 astronauts would undoubtedly be proud of. For decades, the monumental task of reaching orbit had been the exclusive domain of nations. It was an undertaking measured not just in billions of dollars, but in the collective will of superpowers, a feat so complex and expensive that only governments with vast resources and geopolitical motives could even attempt it. This was the unquestioned reality of spaceflight, a high bar that kept the cosmos locked away behind a formidable barrier of bureaucracy, national prestige, and deep public treasuries. The idea that a small company, funded by private investment and the ambition of a single visionary individual, could succeed where only the mightiest nations had prevailed seemed not just far-fetched but nearly delusional. This deeply entrenched monopoly was what made the journey of SpaceX and its Falcon 1 rocket not just an engineering challenge but a revolutionary act. The story of Falcon 1 is a saga of perseverance in the face of repeated, humiliating, and publicly spectacular failure. Founded by entrepreneur Elon Musk with the audacious goal of eventually making humanity a multi-planetary species, SpaceX first had to prove it could simply reach Earth orbit. Their approach was radically different from the established aerospace giants. They embraced vertical integration, designing and building most components in-house to control costs and accelerate innovation. The Falcon 1 itself was a modest vehicle by historical standards, a 70-foot-tall, two-stage rocket powered by liquid oxygen and rocket-grade kerosene. But its simplicity belied its ambition. From a makeshift launch site on Omelek Island, part of the Kwajalein Atoll in the Pacific, the small SpaceX team embarked on a brutal learning curve. Their first launch in 2006 ended just 33 seconds into flight when a corroded nut failed and caused an engine fire. Their second launch in 2007 fared better, but the rocket spun out of control and was destroyed before reaching orbit. The third flight in 2008 was the most heartbreaking of all. It was nearly perfect. The first stage separation was flawless, but a residual thrust pulse during separation caused the spent first stage to coast up and collide with the second stage engine just as it was igniting, dooming the mission mere moments from success. With resources dwindling and the global financial crisis looming, the company was on the brink of collapse. They had material for just one more rocket. The pressure on the fourth launch attempt on September 28, 2008 was existential. Failure meant the almost certain end of SpaceX. The world wasn't really watching. To most, it was just another obscure rocket test. But for the team gathered in their Hawthorne, California headquarters and on Kwajalein, everything was on the line. As the countdown reached zero, the Merlin engine lit and the rocket began to climb. This time, there was no fire, no spin, no collision. The first stage performed perfectly and fell away. The second stage Kestrel engine ignited cleanly, pushing the payload, a dummy mass simulating a satellite toward its target. Then came the final, agonizing wait. For the rocket to truly reach orbit, the second stage had to burn for a full 6 minutes. As the clock ticked past that mark and telemetry confirmed a successful engine cutoff, a wave of pure, unrestrained euphoria erupted at mission control. They had done it. Falcon 1 became the first privately developed, liquid-fueled rocket to successfully achieve Earth orbit. The video from the second stage camera, showing our beautiful planet curving against the blackness of space, was not just a technical achievement, it was a declaration that a new era had begun. The ripple effects of this success were immediate and profound. It shattered the psychological and practical government monopoly on space access. SpaceX had proven that a commercial company could not only design and build a rocket but could do so with a radically different economic model. One focused on efficiency and innovation rather than cost-plus contracts. This single flight catalyzed the entire new space industry, proving to investors that commercial spaceflight was a viable, investable proposition. It validated the company's lean, iterative approach to engineering, learning from each failure to rapidly improve the next design. The data and confidence gained from Falcon 1 became the direct foundation for the much larger Falcon 9 rocket, which would go on to revolutionize the industry with its reusable first stage. By breaking the cycle of tradition and demonstrating that the barrier to space was not insurmountable, Falcon 1 fundamentally rewrote the economics of reaching orbit. It transformed space from a destination reserved for nations into a frontier open for business, setting the stage for the booming commercial space economy, the rise of satellite mega-constellations, and the renewed ambition to return to the Moon and journey to Mars not as a government program but as a human endeavor. After the hard-won successes of smaller rovers like Sojourner, Spirit, and Opportunity, the next logical step in our Martian quest demanded a quantum leap in both ambition and capability. We needed more than a mobile geologist. We needed a fully equipped, rolling analytical laboratory capable of performing the most sophisticated experiments ever attempted on another world. That laboratory was the Mars Science Laboratory, and its centerpiece was the car-sized Curiosity rover. But getting this massive, one-ton machine, the heaviest payload ever sent to the Martian surface safely to the ground, required an entirely new landing architecture, one so audaciously complex and reliant on perfect, split-second timing that its engineers grimly dubbed it the 7 minutes of terror. This terrifying interval refers to the time it would take for the spacecraft carrying Curiosity to slam into the top of the Martian atmosphere at over 13,000 miles per hour and finally come to a soft, wheels-down stop on the surface. In those 420 seconds, the spacecraft had to execute over 6 pyrotechnic events and major transformations with zero margin for error. The sequence began with a guided entry where thrusters on the aeroshell fired to steer the craft through the atmosphere, bleeding off speed and navigating toward the target. As it slowed, a massive supersonic parachute, the largest ever deployed on another planet, had to inflate at precisely the right moment to slow the descent further. But the parachute alone was insufficient for the final stage. In a breathtaking maneuver, the heat shield would then jettison, and the descent stage, with the rover tucked beneath it, would fire its retro rockets. This sky crane maneuver was the most nerve-wracking part of the entire sequence. The rocket-powered descent stage would fly to a hover about 20 meters above the surface, and then begin to lower the rover on 3 nylon tethers like a kind of cosmic marionette. Once the rover's wheels made contact with Mars, the tethers were severed, and the descent stage would fly away to crash at a safe distance. This entire intricate ballet had to be performed autonomously by the spacecraft's computer, as the 22-minute radio delay to Earth made any real-time guidance from mission control impossible. The team at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory could only monitor the data and wait, completely powerless to intervene. On the night of August 5, 2012, the entire world seemed to hold its breath. The landing was broadcast live, and millions watched the tense, celebratory atmosphere in the control room. As the expected time of atmospheric entry passed, the first signals confirming each critical step began to trickle in, each one met with a louder wave of applause and relief. Parachute deployed, heat shield separated, powered descent initiated. Then came the call everyone was waiting for. Engineer Alan Chen, the flight director responsible for the landing phase, called out the updates from his console. "We are in powered flight. We're beginning to throttle down. We're at constant velocity, standing by for Sky Crane." After an agonizing pause, the triumphant call came through. "Touchdown confirmed. We're safe on Mars." The control room exploded in a catharsis of cheers, tears, and ecstatic celebration. The impossible-sounding Sky Crane had worked flawlessly. Curiosity was on the ground in Gale Crater, ready to begin its mission, and what a mission it was. While its predecessors had followed the strategy of follow the water, Curiosity's prime directive was to assess the planet's overall habitability. Its landing site was chosen with exquisite care. Gale Crater was not just any impact scar. It contained a massive central mound, Mount Sharp, rising over 3 miles from the crater floor. This mountain was a geologic treasure trove, its layers representing a sequential record of Martian history, much like the pages of a book. The rover's goal was to drive up this mountain, reading those pages to understand how Mars transitioned from a warmer, wetter world in its distant past to the cold, dry desert it is today. Curiosity's onboard laboratory was unparalleled. It could drill into rocks, pulverize the samples into powder, and deliver them to two sophisticated internal instruments. The Sample Analysis at Mars, or SAM, suite was a miniature chemical plant that could vaporize samples and use a gas chromatograph and mass spectrometer to identify a wide range of organic compounds. The Chemistry and Mineralogy, or Chi-Min, instrument used X-ray diffraction to identify the crystalline structure of minerals, revealing the environmental conditions under which they formed. The discoveries began almost immediately. In its first year, drilling into fine-grained sedimentary rock in an area called Yellowknife Bay, Curiosity struck scientific gold. The analysis revealed clay minerals that could only form in the presence of neutral pH, non-salty, fresh water. They had found the site of an ancient lakebed, an environment that billions of years ago would have been perfectly habitable for microbial life, complete with all the key chemical ingredients needed for life as we know it: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, sulfur, and phosphorus. The case grew even stronger over the following years. As the rover climbed Mount Sharp, it continued to find evidence of past water, including streams, deltas, and groundwater, suggesting that these habitable conditions persisted for millions, perhaps even tens of millions of years. Then, in a monumental announcement in 2018, NASA confirmed that Curiosity had made another landmark discovery. By drilling into 3-billion-year-old mudstone, SAM had detected several types of organic molecules: thiophenes, benzenes, and other complex carbon chains. While these molecules are not themselves proof of life, as they can be created through non-biological processes, their presence was a stunning revelation. They confirmed that the basic building blocks of life were not only present on ancient Mars, but have also been preserved in the rock record for billions of years. Curiosity's findings dramatically advanced the case that Mars was not only habitable in its distant past, but also possessed the necessary organic chemistry for life to potentially have arisen. It transformed the question from a speculative, could Mars have ever supported life, to a far more pressing and evidence-based, if life did arise, where did it go, and how do we find its traces? The rover's ongoing journey up Mount Sharp continues to peel back the layers of Martian history, each new discovery bringing us closer to answering one of humanity's most profound and enduring questions. For centuries, black holes existed only in the realm of theory and imagination. They were the ultimate cosmic paradox, objects of such immense gravity that not even light could escape their grasp, making them by their very nature invisible and seemingly impossible to ever observe directly. Albert Einstein's theory of general relativity predicted their existence, and astronomers had gathered overwhelming indirect evidence for them, from the frantic orbits of stars at the heart of our galaxy to the gravitational waves that rippled across space-time from their colossal collisions. Yet the defining feature of a black hole, its event horizon, remained a mathematical abstraction, a line in the cosmic sand that we could never cross and never see. All of that changed on April 10, 2019, when a team of over 200 scientists working with the Event Horizon Telescope project unveiled an image that stopped the world in its tracks. It was a slightly blurry, fiery orange ring of light encircling a perfect circle of profound darkness. It was the shadow of the supermassive black hole at the heart of the galaxy Messier 87, and it was the first direct visual proof of one of the universe's most enigmatic monsters. The sheer audacity of this project is difficult to overstate. The black hole in M87 is a behemoth weighing in at 6.5 billion times the mass of our Sun. But it is also 55 million light-years away. To resolve an object of that size at that distance requires a telescope of literally planetary dimensions, an instrument with a resolution so sharp it could theoretically read a newspaper in New York from a sidewalk cafe in Paris. Since building a single telescope that large is an obvious impossibility, scientists did the next best thing. They built a virtual one. The Event Horizon Telescope is not one physical structure but a global network of 8 pre-existing radio observatories, synchronized to act as one giant instrument through a technique known as very long baseline interferometry. These telescopes, located at high-altitude sites from the volcanoes of Hawaii and Mexico to the mountains of Arizona and the Spanish Sierra Nevada, from the extreme deserts of Chile's Atacama to the frigid landscape of Antarctica, all had to observe the same target at the exact same time. They recorded the faint radio waves emanating from the superheated plasma swirling around the black hole's event horizon, and each site stored its data on banks of high-performance hard drives. These drives, filled with 5 petabytes of data equivalent to a lifetime of selfies for 40,000 people, were then physically shipped to central processing centers in Massachusetts and Germany. There, the signals were painstakingly combined and correlated using atomic clocks as a precise timing reference, a digital sleight of hand that effectively created a single telescope the size of our entire planet. The observation run itself was a breathtaking exercise in global coordination and luck. The telescopes only had a narrow window of about 10 days in April of 2017, when the weather conditions were just right at all 8 remote locations simultaneously. For the data to be usable, the atmosphere had to be crystal clear and bone dry at every site, from the South Pole to the Andes, a logistical nightmare that required an army of dedicated technicians and scientists standing by. Once the data was collected, the real work began. It took 2 years of supercomputer-aided analysis and meticulous reconstruction to transform those raw signals into the now iconic image. The team had to develop new algorithms and filtering techniques to remove the effects of Earth's atmosphere and piece together the incomplete picture, much like a forensic artist reconstructing a face from fragmentary evidence. The result was not a conventional photograph but a mathematical revelation, a visual representation of light warped by unimaginable gravity. The glowing ring we see is not the black hole itself but the photon sphere, the point of no return where light is bent into a circular path around the abyss. The dark shadow at the center is the event horizon, the black hole's silhouette against this brilliant backdrop of hot gas, a region where space-time itself is so warped that it plunges into infinity. The scientific implications of this image are as profound as the image itself is simple. It provides the most direct and compelling validation yet of Einstein's theory of general relativity, which perfectly predicted what the shadow of a black hole should look like. The size and shape of the shadow match the predictions from Einstein's equations with stunning accuracy, proving that his century-old theory holds true even in the most extreme gravitational environment ever tested. This observation also gave astronomers powerful new tools to study how black holes accrete matter and launch jets of particles that travel at nearly the speed of light, phenomena that can influence the evolution of entire galaxies. By finally seeing the central engine, we can begin to understand how these cosmic powerhouses shape the universe around them. The first image of a black hole did more than just confirm a theory. It opened an entirely new window onto the universe, inaugurating a new era of astrophysics where we can finally observe and study the invisible boundaries that govern the most powerful objects in existence, forever changing our relationship with the dark hearts of galaxies. From that first simple beep of Sputnik to the stunning revelation of a black hole's shadow, the journey we've taken through these 30 events is nothing less than the story of humanity rewriting its own destiny. We've watched as our venture into the cosmos fundamentally reshaped every facet of our existence. Technologically, the relentless demands of spaceflight catalyzed a revolution in miniaturization, materials science, and computing, spinning off innovations that power our daily lives, from satellite navigation and global instant communication to medical imaging and water purification systems. Geopolitically, we witnessed the tension of the Cold War transform, through brush-with-death moments like the Cuban Missile Crisis, into a framework for international cooperation, ultimately culminating in the incredible partnership that built and sustains the International Space Station, a shining testament to what we can achieve when we choose to work together. Scientifically, the impact is almost incalculable. Our robotic emissaries have turned points of light in our telescopes into vibrant, dynamic worlds, revealing volcanoes on Io, oceans on Europa, and ancient riverbeds on Mars. Telescopes like Hubble have peered back in time to the infancy of galaxies, helping us pinpoint the age of the universe and discover the mysterious dark energy that dictates its fate. And perhaps most profoundly, this journey has irrevocably altered our perception of our own place in the grand scheme of things. The iconic Earthrise and blue marble photographs gifted us with the overview effect, a visceral understanding of our planet's stunning beauty and heartbreaking fragility, helping to birth the modern environmental movement and forever reminding us that we are all crew members on a single spaceship Earth, hurtling through the void together. As we stand at this moment, looking back at the giants whose shoulders we stand upon, we are also poised on the brink of an entirely new chapter. The next great leap is already unfolding before our eyes, driven by a powerful combination of government agencies and private enterprises. We are witnessing the dawn of reusable rocketry, which is dramatically lowering the cost of access to space and opening the door to a future of lunar bases, a sustained human presence on Mars, and perhaps even the first journeys to the asteroids. The next set of history-altering events might involve the discovery of biosignatures on another world, the construction of the first sustainable city on Mars, or the detection of an unmistakable signal from an intelligence beyond our own. The cosmos has forever been a mirror, reflecting back at us our greatest fears and our most audacious hopes. Our continued exploration promises to not only reveal more about the universe, but to continue revealing more about ourselves, our resilience, our creativity, and our unquenchable thirst to understand. The next page of this story is waiting to be written, and it will be shaped by the curiosity and courage of the next generation of explorers. We want to hear from you. Which of these 30 events do you think had the most profound impact on history? And what future milestone are you most excited to witness? Share